Tonight we drift toward the mouth of the Pearl River, where warm mist hangs above black water and the lanterns of Canton tremble softly in the humid dark. You stand on the deck of a foreign merchant ship sometime in the early 19th century, listening to wood creak beneath your boots while tidewater slaps gently against the hull. The air smells of salt, wet rope, lamp oil, and distant cooking fires drifting from the crowded Chinese shoreline. Somewhere beyond the darkness, thousands of people are still awake. Porters carry crates through narrow alleys. Tea merchants argue over prices by candlelight. Dock workers squat beside steaming bowls of rice. Small boats slide silently through the river channels like insects crossing a pond. The world feels enormous tonight, but it also feels fragile. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And wherever you happen to be listening from tonight, perhaps in a quiet apartment, a darkened house, or a parked car after midnight, feel welcome to share your location, your local time, and what part of history you enjoy most. There is something comforting about strangers gathering quietly around old stories. The ship beneath you belongs to the British East India Company, one of the strangest creations in human history. It is not fully a government, not fully a business, yet it carries armies, controls ports, collects taxes, and moves across oceans with the confidence of an empire. And tonight, its attention is fixed entirely upon China. At first glance, the relationship seems simple enough. Britain wants tea, endless amounts of it. Tea for breakfast tables in London, tea for factory workers in Manchester, tea for tired clerks hunched beneath grey skies. The habit has consumed Britain completely. Alongside tea comes silk, porcelain, lacquerware, carved ivory, delicate paintings and fine furniture. Chinese goods flow westward in staggering quantities, but the trade moves in only one direction. China, under the Qing dynasty, has little interest in British products. The Qianlong Emperor once dismissed European manufactured goods with quiet contempt. China, in the imperial imagination, already possesses everything worth having. Foreign merchants are tolerated, but only barely. They are confined to Canton under strict supervision. They cannot freely travel inland. They cannot learn too much. They cannot belong. You can feel the tension already, though no war has begun. Along the waterfront, foreign traders live inside a narrow district called the factories. Despite the name, these are not industrial buildings. They are warehouses, offices, and cramped residences packed together beside the river. British, American, Dutch, and Portuguese merchants operate there under heavy restrictions, watched carefully by Qing officials and local intermediaries known as the Hong merchants. At night the district smells of damp stone, tobacco smoke, spilled wine, and river mud. The foreigners complain constantly. They complain about regulations, about delays, about insults, about the impossibility of dealing directly with Chinese officials. They write long frustrated letters home describing endless ceremonies, confusing etiquette, and the suffocating limits imposed upon them. But beneath the irritation lies something deeper: humiliation. Britain is entering the height of industrial power, or its navy stretches across the oceans. Its factories roar day and night. Its bankers finance global trade on a scale the world has never seen. Yet here in Canton, British merchants bow before rules they neither respect nor fully understand. And China sees little reason to change. If you walk through Canton itself, the city overwhelms the senses. Narrow streets pulse with noise, bamboo poles hang overhead carrying drying clothes, and banners painted with black calligraphy. Herbal medicine shops display roots, powders, and preserved creatures floating inside cloudy jars. Street vendors shout over one another beside iron pans crackling with oil. Sedan chairs weave through crowds while children chase one another barefoot across worn stone. Life feels dense here, ancient, self-contained. Foreigners rarely glimpse the deeper interior of Chinese society, but enough reaches them to inspire fascination and resentment in equal measure. They see scholar officials in silk robes preparing for impossible imperial examinations. They hear stories about provinces so large they resemble kingdoms. They encounter a bureaucracy older than most European states. And quietly, almost invisibly, the imbalance grows worse. Silver pours into China year after year as payment for tea and luxury goods. Britain grows anxious. The very deficit becomes an obsession in London. Politicians, merchants, and company officials search desperately for a solution. Something must reverse the flow, something addictive, something profitable, something easy to transport across a war. You already know the answer waiting in the shadows. Opium, not yet the vast catastrophe it will become. For now it arrives gradually, almost politely, tucked inside the routine of maritime commerce. The British East India Company oversees opium production in India, especially in Bengal. The drug is auctioned to private traders, who then smuggle it toward the Chinese coast despite imperial bans. Everyone understands the trade is illegal. Everyone Corruption spreads quietly through the ports. Local officials accept bribes. Merchants look away. Smugglers grow rich beyond imagination. Silver begins flowing out of China instead of into it, and addiction follows close behind. Not all at once. History rarely moves that neatly. At first, the smoking dens remain scattered and discreet. A wealthy scholar here, a dock worker there, a merchant seeking relief after exhausting negotiations. The smoke curls upwards softly from small pipes while conversation slows and eyelids droop. The drug settles over the body like warm rain. Many users believe they control it. Some do, for a while. Others disappear into dependency with frightening speed. Meanwhile, Britain tells itself comforting stories. Some officials claim opium merely satisfies existing demand. Others pretend private merchants bear the moral responsibility. Profit creates its own fog, distance helps maintain it. The suffering remains mostly invisible from London drawing rooms. But inside China, concern deepens. Imperial officials send reports northward describing rising addiction among soldiers and civil servants. Silver shortages begin disrupting local economies. Families sell possessions to support habits that quietly consume entire households. Moral panic mixes with genuine social collapse. Still, enforcement remains inconsistent. The Qing Empire is enormous. Messages travel slowly. Corruption infects every layer of administration. Some officials want harsher crackdowns. Others fear economic disruption. Others simply take bribes and continue smiling politely through endless ceremonies. You can almost hear the empire straining beneath the surface, and yet ordinary life continues. A father walks home carrying fish wrapped in paper. A young scholar studies beside candlelight until dawn. Riverboats crowd the harbour with vegetables, pottery, salt timber, and grain. Temple bells ring softly through the evening haze. Rain taps against tiled roofs. History always unfolds beside ordinary exhaustion. That may be the strangest part. No one standing on the Canton waterfront fully understands what approach is. Not the Chinese officials watching foreign ships from guarded offices. Not the British merchants counting profits beside candle-lit ledgers. Not the sailors unloading crates under monsoon clouds. Certainly not the families already slipping quietly into addiction behind shuttered windows. But the balance between two great empires is beginning to fail. And once that balance breaks, the consequences will echo far beyond these riverbanks. Morning arrives slowly over the Pearl River. The mist lifts in pale ribbons above the water, while hundreds of small boats begin their restless movements through the harbour. You hear poles knocking against wooden hulls. Fishermen shout to one another through the haze. Somewhere nearby, a rooster protests the dawn with surprising determination. Canton wakes early because trade wakes early, and trade is now the heartbeat of this coastline. Inside the foreign factories, clerks already bend over ledgers by candlelight despite the growing sun. Ink stains their fingers black. Sweat gathers beneath stiff collars. Tea chests are counted, cargo tallies reviewed. prices argued over in low-tired voices. Outside, Chinese labourers carry impossible weights balanced across bamboo poles resting on their shoulders. Their sandals slap against wet stone streets polished smooth by generations of footsteps. A few pause briefly beside food stalls where rice porridge steams into the cool air. The city feels alive in every direction, and somewhere far away, in Britain itself, millions of people begin another morning with Chinese tea warming their hands. It's difficult to overstate how deeply tea has entered British life by the early 19th century. Rich families drink it beneath chandeliers and painted ceilings. Poor labourers drink it in crowded factories where coal smoke darkens the walls. Children drink it diluted with milk. Dock workers drink it before dawn shifts. Parliament debates taxes connected to it. Ships cross entire oceans because of it. An empire has developed a craving, and China holds the supply. You can sense the frustration building within British political circles. Every year, silver leaves Britain in enormous quantities to pay Chinese merchants. The numbers disturb financiers and government officials alike. Trade, in their minds, should strengthen the nation. Instead, silver drains eastward, like water leaking from a cracked vessel. The British try selling manufactured goods to China, woolens, metal tools, clocks, scientific instruments, but demand remains painfully limited. The Qing court still sees European nations as distant trading states rather than equal powers. China's economy is vast, internally productive, and largely self-sufficient. From the imperial perspective, foreign trade exists at the empire's convenience, not from necessity. This difference in worldview matters more than either side fully understands. Britain increasingly thinks in terms of global markets, expanding influence, and commercial rights. Qing China thinks in terms of hierarchy, order, and controlled tribute relationships. Both empires believe their approach is natural. Both assume the other will eventually adapt. Neither truly listens. On rainy evenings in London, merchants gather in private clubs smelling of tobacco, wet wool, and old wood polish. They discuss shipping rates and tea auctions while maps of Asia hang on nearby walls. India already lies under expanding British control. The Caribbean enriches plantation owners. Industrial machinery transforms entire cities. China becomes the missing piece in a growing imperial imagination, not necessarily through conquest at first. Most British officials do not begin by dreaming of war. They dream of access, easier trade, diplomatic recognition, permanent embassies, fewer humiliating restrictions in Canton. But when peaceful access fails, stronger methods slowly enter the conversation. Meanwhile, the East India Company oversees vast opium cultivation in India. With cold administrative efficiency, farmers in Bengal grow poppies under systems shaped by imperial pressure and economic dependency. The raw opium is processed into dense dark cakes, packed carefully into chests and sold at auction in Calcutta. From there, private traders carry it onward toward China. The system allows British authorities a comfortable layer of distance. Officially, the Chinese ban opium importation. Officially, the East India Company does not directly smuggle the drug into Chinese ports. Officially, everyone maintains plausible deniability. Unofficially, fortune or being made. You stand now aboard a receiving ship anchored offshore beyond direct Chinese control. The deck smells of tar, wet hemp, and stale smoke. Armed guards watch silently while smaller Chinese boats approach under cover of darkness. Payment arrives in silver. Crates disappear quickly into hidden coastal networks. The exchanges are efficient because everyone understands the risks. A sailor nearby coughs into the river and mutters that the Chinese officials only care when bribes stop arriving. Another laughs quietly before returning to work. Most men involved in the trade rarely think about the wider consequences. They think about wages, storms, illness, debts back home. History often moves forward through ordinary people protecting their own survival. Inside China, though, the effects become increasingly visible. Addiction spreads through different layers of society. Wealthy merchants smoke opium inside elaborately furnished rooms where carved screens soften lantern light. Scholars seeking relief from pressure and exhaustion begin using it socially. Labourers smoke to dull physical pain after endless days carrying cargo or working fields. The drug settles differently into every life. Some users remain functional for years, others decline rapidly. Families watch savings disappear. Officials warn of weakened soldiers and collapsing discipline. Silver shortages worsen as payment for opium flows outward toward foreign traders. By the 1820s and 1830s, alarm reaches the imperial court with growing urgency. Memorials sent to the emperor describe social decay in language thick with moral anxiety. One official writes of villages hollowed by addiction. Another warns that corruption now protects smugglers at every level of coastal administration. Some reports may exaggerate, others likely understate the damage. No clear agreement survives about the full scale of addiction during these years, but fear itself becomes politically powerful. You can almost imagine the atmosphere inside the Forbidden City in Beijing during winter audiences. Silk robes whisper across polished floors. Officials kneel beneath cold, watchful eyes while presenting reports from distant provinces. The empire feels enormous from here, almost eternal. Yet troubling signs accumulate at the edges. Foreign ships grow bolder, silver disappears, laws lose authority, and beneath everything lies a deeper insult. China believes itself civilized and morally ordered. The opium trade appears not merely illegal, but corrupting in a spiritual sense. Many Qing officials genuinely view the British as profiting from human weakness while hiding behind commercial language. To them, the trade feels poisonous in every possible way, yet Britain increasingly sees Chinese resistance as irrational obstruction. Free trade arguments gain momentum among politicians and merchants. Why should Britain accept restrictive systems imposed by a declining empire? Why should commerce remain trapped inside outdated ceremonial rules? Each side grows more certain of its own righteousness. That certainty hardens quietly over time. And still the ships keep coming. At Canton, the foreign quarter grows tense during negotiation seasons. Merchants pace narrow balconies overlooking the river while awaiting decisions from Chinese authorities. Tempers flare easily in the humid heat. Alcohol flows heavily at night. Young clerks write homesick letters describing loneliness and resentment beneath flickering oil lamps. One of them might pause occasionally beside an open window, listening to distant Chinese music drifting through the dark. A strange sadness hangs over these encounters. Both civilizations admire parts of each other from a distance, while increasingly distrusting everything up close. You feel it in small moments. A British trader mocking Chinese ceremony before privately collecting porcelain with obsessive care. A Chinese official condemning foreign greed while accepting imported clocks as treasured gifts. Mutual fascination tangled tightly with contempt. Outside the city, rain begins falling again across the river delta. Boatmen lower woven hats against the weather. Water ripples beneath lantern reflections somewhere along the coast. Another opium shipment changes hands beneath the cover of darkness. And far beyond the horizon, the machinery of empire continues turning steadily toward conflict. Night settles differently along the southern Chinese coast now. A generation earlier, darkness brought relative stillness to the harbours. Fishing boats drifted quietly. Patrol vessels watched the channels. Merchants slept behind locked doors while rain tapped softly against tiled roofs. But by the 1830s, the coastline has changed. You stand aboard a narrow Chinese smuggling boat slipping through black water beneath a moon, hidden by clouds. The sea smells thick with salt and rotting weeds. Wet wood groans beneath shifting cargo while distant lanterns flicker across the horizon like uncertain stars. Nobody speaks above a whisper. The boatman guiding you through the channels knows these waters intimately. His face is weathered almost beyond age. His hands move automatically across rope and sail. He has carried rice, salt, silk, tea, and sometimes fugitives. Now he carries opium, not because he believes in the trade particularly, because silver pays for food. Along the coast, entire hidden economies are emerging around the drug. Fast boats race between offshore receiving ships and secret inlets. Corrupt officials provide warnings about inspections. Warehouse owners conceal cargo beneath ordinary goods. Brokers arrange payments through networks of merchants and intermediaries who rarely meet face to face. The trade feels slippery and decentralized, difficult even for participants to fully grasp. That makes it powerful. You hear stories everywhere now. Some are exaggerated, some painfully true. A provincial official sells family heirlooms to support his habit while continuing to lecture subordinates about morality. A labourer disappears for days inside an opium den near the docks. A wealthy merchant insists the drug sharpens his concentration, even as his business slowly collapses around him. Human beings are remarkably skilled at explaining their own destruction. Inside the smoking houses, time itself seems to loosen. The rooms remain dimly lit, often by hanging oil lamps clouded with soot. The air feels warm and stale. Sweet smoke lingers inside curtains and cushions until everything smells faintly burned. Men recline on narrow wooden couches while attendants prepare pipes with practiced precision. You notice the silence first, not complete silence, but softened silence. Conversation slow, movements become deliberate, the outside world fades slightly at the edges. Some users arrive after exhausting workdays seeking temporary peace. Others come chasing pleasure, status, or relief from private griefs they never describe aloud. There are scholars here, sailors, clerks, criminals, servants, occasionally soldiers. Addiction does not care much about social rank. Still, historians debate how widespread severe dependency truly becomes during these years. Later political narratives often portray all of China drowning uniformly in opium smoke. But reality appears more uneven. Many people never use the drug at all. Others experiment casually. Some communities resist it fiercely. Yet the social anxiety surrounding opium becomes undeniable because the trade touches something deeper than health alone. It exposes weakness. For Qing officials, the problem is not merely intoxication. It is the growing realization that foreign merchants operate beyond effective imperial control. Laws exist, but enforcement bends under corruption and profit. Coastal authorities issue bans while secretly protecting smugglers. Soldiers consume the very substance they are ordered to suppress. An empire built upon order begins doubting itself. You can feel this unease in government offices scattered across southern China. Clerks copy reports with aching wrists while candles burn low into the night. Magistrates argue over confiscation policies. Couriers arrive carrying fresh accusations of bribery or failed enforcement. Paper accumulates faster than solutions. One exhausted official writes that the coastline resembles a market of poison. Another warns that honest administrators now fear confronting smugglers connected to powerful interests. Some local authorities enforce crackdowns aggressively. Others avoid confrontation entirely. The contradictions become exhausting. Meanwhile, foreign merchants continue building rationalizations around the trade. A British trader in Canton might insist over a dinner that Chinese demand alone sustains the market. Another claims prohibition simply encourages smuggling. A third shrugs and says the entire empire already runs on corruption anyway. Sometimes these arguments sound convincing in candlelit rooms filled with expensive wine and exhaustion, but they also avoid the central truth. The trade exists because it is immensely profitable, and profit possesses a strange ability to dull moral discomfort. You walk now through the foreign quarter during a humid evening after rainfall. Water drips steadily from tiled roofs. Mud clings to boots along narrow alleys between warehouses. Inside crowded offices, merchants calculate earnings from recent shipments, while servants refill cups with hot tea imported from the very country being destabilized around them. The irony would almost feel amusing if the consequences were not becoming so severe. Out at sea, British and American traders increasingly rely on armed escorts. Pirates haunt sections of the coast. Tensions flare between rival smuggling networks. Chinese patrol boats occasionally attempt seizures, though many crews prefer accepting bribes to risking violent confrontation. One night, a customs officer boards a suspicious vessel only to discover his cousin among the crew. Another night, shots echo briefly across dark water before silence returns. Most people involved never consider themselves villains. That may be what makes history difficult to judge cleanly. The Bengali farmer growing poppies under imperial contracts, the Chinese boatman transporting crates through hidden estuaries, the British merchant financing shipments from distant offices, the addicted labourer seeking temporary escape after 14 hours of physical work. Each exists inside systems larger than themselves. Still, choices matter, and somewhere inside the Qing court, pressure is building toward decisive action. The Daoguang Emperor grows increasingly alarmed by reports arriving from the south. Unlike some earlier officials who treated the problem as manageable smuggling, he begins seeing opium as a direct threat to imperial stability. Silver shortages weaken the economy, addiction damages military readiness. Corruption spreads openly through administrative structures. Worse still, foreign traders appear almost impossible to restrain. The emperor demands stronger enforcement. Certain advisors recommend legalization and taxation instead, arguing prohibition has already failed. Others insist moral authority itself depends upon uncompromising suppression. Heated debates unfold inside palace chambers far removed from the muddy realities of the coast. No solution appears clean anymore. Outside Beijing, winter winds move through dry northern courtyards while discussions continue late into the night. Ink freezes slowly in cold rooms. Officials kneel, presenting conflicting strategies. Some fear war with Britain. Others cannot imagine foreigners seriously challenging the Qing Empire militarily. China still sees itself as the centre of civilization. Britain still sees itself as the future. Neither fully understands the other's confidence. Back in Canton, rumours begin spreading through the foreign community that a major crackdown may soon arrive. Merchants grow uneasy, smugglers become cautious, insurance rates rise quietly, some traders consider withdrawing temporarily before tensions worsen. Others double their operations while profits remain high. Human beings often accelerate toward danger once they sense time running short. Along the shoreline, waves break softly against stone embankments beneath another moonless sky. A fisherman repairs torn nets beside a small lantern. Nearby, hidden cargo changes hands in silence. And somewhere inland, a child waits for a father who has not returned home in days. The opium tide keeps moving. Soon, someone will try to stop it by force. Winter grips Beijing with a dry, unforgiving cold. You cross a vast courtyard inside the imperial capital while wind pushes dust against palace walls painted deep red beneath a pale morning sky. Court officials move carefully across frozen stone, their heavy robes brushing softly against the ground. Breath rises in faint clouds. Somewhere in the distance, a bronze bell sounds through the brittle air. Inside the forbidden city, the Daoguang Emperor has grown tired of excuses. For years, reports from the southern coast have arrived wrapped in careful bureaucratic language. Smuggling continues. Corruption spreads. Silver drains from the empire. Military officers smoke opium despite official bans. Civil servants charged with enforcing the law accept bribes from the very merchants they condemn. Enough, the emperor decides, and so attention turns toward one man, Lin Zexu. History remembers us saw him now as Commissioner Lin, though at this moment he is simply an experienced Qing official with a reputation for honesty, discipline, and unusual moral seriousness. He has spent decades inside the imperial bureaucracy navigating floods, famines, taxation disputes, and corruption investigations. Unlike many officials, he appears difficult to buy. That alone makes him dangerous. You imagine him receiving the imperial appointment in early 1839. Perhaps the room smells faintly of old paper and lamp smoke. Perhaps snow drifts quietly beyond the windows. The Emperor's order is clear enough. Travel south to Canton, in the opium trade, restore order. The mission carries enormous pressure. Failure would embarrass the throne itself. Lin accepts anyway. As he begins the long journey southward, the empire unfolds around him in exhausting stages. Rivers clogged with cargo traffic, villages crouched beneath grey skies, endless roads carved through muddy countryside, inns smelling of damp straw and cabbage soup, relay stations where tired horses steam in the cold. He travels through a nation already showing signs of strain. Population growth has placed enormous pressure upon land and resources. Rural poverty deepens in many regions. Local corruption weakens trust in officials. Secret societies spread quietly through certain provinces. The Qing dynasty remains vast and powerful, but beneath the surface some cracks are forming. Lin likely senses this. He is not a foolish idealist charging blindly towards a single problem. He understands that opium represents something larger, a moral crisis, yes, but also a political humiliation. Foreign merchants openly violate imperial law because they believe China lacks the will to stop them. Lin intends to prove otherwise. When he finally arrives in Canton, the atmosphere changes immediately. The city already feels tense before his arrival. Rumours move through the streets faster than official announcements. Merchants whisper in tea houses. Smugglers relocate hidden cargo. Foreign traders exchange nervous letters over dinner tables lit by trembling candles. Then Lin enters the city with the full authority of the emperor behind him. You can almost feel the shift in the air. He establishes strict new enforcement measures at once. Chinese opium dealers face harsh punishment. Addicts are pressured into confession and treatment. Coastal surveillance intensifies, most dramatically. Lin demands that all foreign merchants surrender their opium stocks immediately, not eventually, not partially, completely. The foreign community reacts with disbelief. Many British and American traders have spent years assuming Chinese threats would remain inconsistent and negotiable like previous crackdowns. Corruption usually softened enforcement. Bribes usually solved problems. Business usually continued. But Lin behaves differently. He cuts through delay and ceremony with startling directness. The foreign factories soon resemble a trapped island beside the river. Chinese workers stop supplying provisions. Communication tightens. Guards monitor movement carefully. Tension thickens hour by hour beneath the humid southern heat. Inside crowded merchant residences, arguments erupt late into the night. Some traders want compromise, others demand resistance. Several insist British naval power will eventually protect commercial interests if confrontation escalates. But no warships stand nearby at this moment. Only nervous merchants surrounded by an increasingly determined imperial administration. The British superintendent, Charles Elliot, faces an impossible situation. A former naval officer with diplomatic responsibilities, Elliot understands both the dangers of escalation and the limited options available. He does not personally control the opium trade. Yet British merchants expect protection from him. Chinese authorities expect cooperation. London remains months away by sea. Every decision feels temporary and irreversible at the same time. Eventually, Elliot makes the choice that changes everything. He orders British merchants to surrender their opium to the Chinese authorities under promise of future compensation from his government. The amount shocks even seasoned observers. More than 20,000 chests, an almost unimaginable quantity. You stand now near the storage areas as confiscated opium accumulates under heavy guard. Workers move crates through humid air thick with sweat and river mud. Soldiers watch nervously beside stacked cargo stretching across the compound like dark wooden walls. The scale alone feels overwhelming. Lin refuses half measures. He wants not merely confiscation, but destruction. Public destruction. Moral destruction. A statement visible across China and beyond. Before carrying out the operation, he writes a famous letter addressed to Queen Victoria herself. In respectful but firm language, Lin questions how Britain could forbid opium domestically while profiting from its sale in China. The letter carries genuine moral outrage. There is no clear evidence Queen Victoria ever read it directly. That small historical uncertainty feels strangely symbolic. Two empires speak past one another while believing communication has occurred. As preparations continue in Canton, ordinary life grows uneasy around the edges. Shopkeepers worry about unrest damaging trade. Labourers fear unemployment if foreign commerce collapses. Families hear rumours of conflict spreading through the ports. Even the weather seems oppressive. Heavy air presses against the city. Clothing sticks to skin. Mosquitoes drift through stagnant evening heat while lanterns sway gently outside crowded taverns. Sailors drink heavily. Clerks write anxious letters home. Chinese officials work by candlelight through endless reports and inventories. Lin himself appears tireless during these weeks. Contemporary accounts describe him as disciplined almost to severity. Yet behind the firmness lies something more human. He truly believes the empire stands at a moral crossroads. He believes decisive action can still restore balance before deeper catastrophe arrives. That conviction gives him strength. It also blinds him slightly. Because Lin understands corruption, addiction, and administration far better than he understands industrial imperial warfare. Few Qing officials yet grasp the full scale of Britain's naval capabilities or political determination when commercial interests feel threatened. Likewise, many British observers completely misunderstand the emotional significance of opium suppression inside China. Each side sees principle, each side sees insult, and between them, compromise slowly disappears. Outside Canton, rain begins falling across the Pearl River Delta once again. Water drums softly against rooftops and ship decks. Somewhere offshore, foreign sailors stare toward the dark coastline, wondering whether business will resume or violence will follow. Inside government compounds, guards tighten security around the confiscated opium. Soon the destruction will begin, and with it, the final fragile barrier before war. The destruction begins under a heavy southern sky. You stand near the shoreline at Human, where the Pearl River widens toward the sea beneath slow-moving clouds the colour of worn iron. The air smells of salt, wet earth, and something bitter already rising from the great pits prepared along the water's edge. Thousands gather to watch. Officials in layered robes stand beside soldiers carrying spears and matchlock muskets. Labourers move through the mud, hauling crates with exhausted shoulders. Curious villagers linger at the edges of the crowd despite warnings to stay back. Foreign observers watch from a distance through narrowed eyes, and everywhere sit the chests. Rows upon rows upon rows of them, dark wooden boxes stacked so high they resemble walls built from compressed greed itself. Inside each chest lies processed opium packed carefully for profit. Years of cultivation in India, months of transport across oceans, fortunes measured not only in silver, but in human dependency. Commissioner Lin intends to erase it publicly. The operation unfolds with bureaucratic precision. Workers split open the chests using axes and iron tools while soldiers supervise carefully. Dense brown opium cakes tumble into trenches lined with stone. Lime and salt water are added to destroy the drug completely before the mixture washes harmlessly into the sea. At least that is the intention. The smell becomes overwhelming quickly. Sharp, sweet, chemical, strange. Even people standing far from the pits later describe the odour clinging to clothing and skin. Some workers wrap cloth around their faces. Others cough openly in the humid heat while continuing the labour hour after hour. The destruction lasts weeks. That detail matters. This is not one dramatic afternoon, but a prolonged ritual of state authority. Every day more chests are opened, more opium dissolved, more statements made to China, to Britain, and to history itself. Lin wants the world to witness imperial resolve, and for a moment it seems he may succeed. Across southern China, news spreads rapidly. Many ordinary citizens support the crackdown enthusiastically. Some communities celebrate openly. Officials send congratulatory memorials toward Beijing praising Lin's determination and moral courage. Even certain foreign observers privately admit admiration for the scale of the operation. Yet beneath the surface, tension thickens dangerously. British merchants now demand compensation for the destroyed opium. Many insist the Qing government has violated property rights despite the trade's illegality under Chinese law. Others focus less on the opium itself and more on what they view as intolerable treatment by Chinese authorities during the crisis. Humiliation settles heavily over the foreign community. Inside the factories at Canton, conversations grow darker after nightfall. Candles burn late while merchants pace narrow rooms smelling of sweat, tobacco, and damp paper. Tempers sharpen easily. Some traders speak openly of revenge. Others worry Britain may abandon them entirely. Charles Eliot tries balancing impossible pressures once again. He understands Chinese anger toward the opium trade more than many merchants do. But he also believes British prestige and commercial security now require a forceful response. If Britain accepts the confiscation without retaliation, what happens to future negotiations? What happens to imperial credibility? These questions begin echoing far beyond Canton. Months earlier, compromise might still have been possible. Now positions harden on every side. Meanwhile, Commissioner Lin continues writing reports northward filled with cautious optimism. The Emperor appears pleased. The crackdown has succeeded beyond expectations. Foreign merchants seem weakened. Imperial authority has been asserted clearly, but victory can create dangerous illusions. The Qing court still does not fully grasp the nature of the opponent gathering beyond the horizon. Britain in the 1830s is no longer merely a distant trading kingdom, arriving occasionally at Chinese ports. It is the center of an industrializing global empire powered by steam technology, modern naval logistics, expanding finance systems, and growing confidence in military superiority. And crucially, many British leaders increasingly frame the conflict not around narcotics but around trade rights, diplomatic equality, and national honour.
Language changes everything.
Back in London, the debate becomes fierce and complicated. Not everyone supports military action. Some politicians condemn the opium trade openly and feel uncomfortable defending smugglers through warfare. Religious groups criticise the moral hypocrisy involved. Certain newspapers question whether Britain should fight for the interests of narcotics merchants, but commercial pressure remains powerful. So does imperial pride. Parliamentary discussions stretch late into smoky chambers lit by flickering lamps, while rain lashes against windows outside. Speeches invoke free trade, national dignity, and the protection of British subjects abroad. Opponents warn of immoral aggression and unnecessary conflict. The vote for military action eventually passes by a surprisingly narrow margin. History sometimes turns on exhaustion, persuasion, and a handful of uncertain men walking through cold corridors after midnight. Far away in China, none of this is yet fully visible. Life continues with uneasy normalcy across much of the empire. Farmers harvest rice beneath humid skies. Children study classical texts by candlelight. River traffic crowds the canals carrying grain, timber, and ceramics. In tea houses, people discuss rumours that seem distant and confusing. Many still assume the foreigners will retreat eventually. After all, China has weathered so albeit before. But down along the southern coast, small incidents begin multiplying. British naval patrols manoeuvre more aggressively near Chinese waters. Local confrontations escalate between sailors and villagers. Misunderstandings turn hostile quickly because neither side trusts the other's legal systems or intentions. Then comes the Kowloon incident. A group of drunken British sailors brawl near a village outside Hong Kong, and a Chinese man dies during the violence. Chinese authorities demand the responsible individuals face Qing justice. Eliot refuses, fearing unfair treatment and asserting British jurisdiction over his nationals. To Qing officials, this refusal feels outrageous. To British authorities, surrendering sailors to Chinese courts feels equally impossible. Two legal worlds collide directly, and beneath the legal arguments lies something colder. Power. Who possesses it? Who defines it? Who submits to it? You can sense the atmosphere changing now along the coast. Merchant vessels move cautiously through uncertain waters. Chinese forts strengthen defensive preparations. Foreign sailors clean weapons beside ship lanterns swinging in humid night air. The sea itself feels tense somehow. A British marine sharpens his bayonet while joking nervously about Chinese cannons. Nearby, a young Chinese soldier posted along the riverbank writes a letter home describing rumours of warships and strange foreign guns. Neither fully understands what approaches. The First Opium War will not begin with a single clean declaration. It emerges gradually through overlapping fears, wounded pride, commercial pressure, cultural misunderstanding, and political momentum difficult for anyone to stop. At Humen, the last of the confiscated opium dissolves into foul-smelling trenches beneath relentless summer heat. Commissioner Lin watches carefully as workers complete the task. For a brief moment, standing beside the river, he may believe the Empire has reclaimed control of its destiny. But offshore, beyond the grey horizon, British warships are already moving eastward. The first British warships arrive like weather from another century. You see them emerging through monsoon haze beyond the Chinese coastline, dark silhouettes moving steadily across restless grey water. Rain drifts sideways through strong coastal winds. Waves strike against iron-reinforced hulls with dull, heavy sounds. Sailcloth snaps sharply overhead, while steam funnels release slow black smoke into the humid sky. The Chinese defenders watching from shore do not entirely understand what they are seeing. That uncertainty matters immediately. For generations, Qing coastal defences are prepared mainly for pirates, smugglers, or regional maritime threats. Traditional war junks patrol river mouths and harbours, carrying cannon that still rely heavily upon older designs and tactics. Many soldiers possess courage and discipline. Some officers are highly competent. But the technological gap now opening between Britain and Qing China is devastating. Industrialization has changed warfare faster than the Qing state fully realizes. British naval crews drill constantly aboard cramped ships smelling of tar, coal smoke, wet canvas, and preserved meat. Cannon crews practice loading procedures until movements become automatic. Officers carry charts mapping coastlines thousands of miles from home. Marines train for amphibious assaults with cold professional efficiency. The Empire has learned how to project violence across oceans. China has not yet learned how vulnerable its coast has become. The opening clashes feel strangely unreal to many witnesses. Chinese forts positioned along the Pearl River fire heavy cannon toward distant British vessels, but the accuracy proves inconsistent. Smoke billows across the water while echoes roll through the humid air. British ships maneuver with alarming speed and discipline, returning fake with a devastating precision. You hear the sound before you fully understand the destruction. A deep cracking roar across the water, then splintering wood, then men screaming. Traditional Chinese wore junks, beautiful in calmer times with painted hulls and broad sails, struggled terribly against modern naval artillery. Some crews fight bravely until decks collapse beneath them. Others retreat in confusion as explosions tear through rigging and gun positions. The British are shocked too, though for different reasons. Several officers expected resistance, but not such military imbalance. One British observer later compares certain engagements to demolishing defences rather than battling equals. The language carries disturbing confidence, already hardening into imperial certainty, and yet war rarely feels glorious up close. A wounded Chinese sailor crawls across shattered planks searching for water while smoke stings his eyes, nearly blind. A British Marine vomits quietly after his first close-range bombardment. Bodies drift in oily harbour water beneath broken masts. Rain continues falling through everything. At Canton, fear spreads quickly through the population. Rumours arrive faster than reliable information. Some claim entire foreign fleets are approaching Beijing itself. Others insist Chinese forces have already destroyed multiple British ships. Crowded tea houses buzz with contradictory stories while nervous merchants hide valuables or relocate families inland. Ordinary civilians begin preparing for uncertainty. You walk now through narrow streets where shopkeepers lower wooden shutters earlier than usual. The smell of incense mixes with sewage and damp brick after heavy rainfall. Children notice the tension in adult voices, even when nobody explains it directly. War always enters civilian life first as atmosphere. Commissioner Lin remains determined despite the mounting crisis. He continues advocating resistance and believes Britain can still be contained through coastal defence and imperial resolve. In some respects, his confidence reflects broader Qing assumptions. China remains vast beyond imagination compared to the relatively small number of British forces operating near the coast. How could distant foreigners truly threaten the empire itself? But the British strategy does not initially depend upon conquering China outright. Instead, it focuses on mobility, naval superiority, economic disruption, and psychological pressure. British commanders strike selectively along vulnerable coastal targets, demonstrating power while avoiding deeper overextension. The effect unsettles Qing authorities profoundly. Chinese officials are accustomed to threats emerging across land frontiers from nomadic groups or rival dynasties. Maritime industrial warfare feels unfamiliar and disorienting. Communication between provinces remains slow. Local commanders sometimes exaggerate victories or conceal defeats to protect careers. The emperor receives confused reports from every direction. Inside the Forbidden City, frustration hardens into anger. Some officials accuse Lin of provoking unnecessary conflict through the excessive severity. Others argue the foreigners must be crushed regardless of temporary setbacks. Lin himself becomes increasingly isolated politically. This is one of history's quieter cruelties. He acted decisively because the emperor demanded decisive action. Now that war has erupted, many within the court search urgently for someone to blame. Success had briefly elevated him. Military setbacks now threaten to destroy him. Meanwhile, British forces capture strategic positions near the coast with unnerving efficiency. Chusan Island falls after limited resistance. Coastal forts are bombarded. Trade routes face disruption. Everywhere the British move, they demonstrate technological advantages in artillery, navigation, and naval coordination. Yet British troops also encounter exhaustion, disease, and unfamiliar conditions. The climate alone punishes them relentlessly. Uniforms cling damply to skin beneath oppressive heat. Food spoils quickly. Mosquitoes spread illness through crowded camps. Fresh water becomes precious during long deployments along muddy coastlines. A young sailor from Portsmouth writes home describing China as beautiful and miserable at the same time. He misses cold weather terribly. Another complains about endless rain and insects large enough to carry away small children, which is likely exaggerated but emotionally understandable. Far from political speeches and diplomatic language, most soldiers experience war as discomfort interrupted by terror. Along the Chinese coast, civilians watch strange foreign vessels move through familiar waters with growing dread. Fishermen avoid certain channels entirely now. Villages near defensive positions fear bombardment. Refugees begin appearing along roads carrying bundles wrapped against the rain. And still many Qing officials underestimate the scale of danger. Part of the problem lies in information itself. The emperor rules an enormous empire through layered bureaucratic systems built for stability, not rapid adaptation. Reports are filtered, delayed, softened, or distorted before reaching Beijing. Victories become exaggerated. Defeats become complicated. Reality arrives, Pulo. But eventually reality arrives anyway. Commissioner Lin is removed from his position and later exiled deep into the empire's interior. The man once celebrated for defending China against opium now becomes politically inconvenient. Some later generations will honour him as a patriot and moral hero, Others criticize his miscalculations. History rarely grants clean reputations to those trapped inside impossible moments. As Lin departs Canton under imperial orders, perhaps he understands already that the conflict has escaped everyone's control. The war is no longer simply about opium seizures. It has become a collision between empires carrying profoundly different assumptions about trade, law, diplomacy, and power itself. Out at sea, British ships continue advancing through monsoon waters beneath skies streaked with smoke and rain. And along the Chinese coast, people begin realizing this conflict may not end quickly at all. Canton lives now in a state between commerce and fear. You walk beside the riverfront beneath a grey swollen sky while humid wind carries the smell of mud, smoke, and stagnant water through the crowded streets. The city still moves. Markets still open each morning. Barges still unload vegetables and grain along the docks. Temple incense still curls upward beside murmured prayers. But nothing feels stable anymore. People lower their voices when discussing the foreigners. Shopkeepers glance toward the river before finishing certain sentences. Families begin storing extra rice indoors. Rumours travel faster than official proclamations, and rumours are often more frightening. One says British ships can destroy entire forts in an afternoon. Another claims foreign soldiers eat strange preserved meat from metal containers and never tire in battle. A third insists the Emperor has already assembled massive armies that will soon drive the invaders into the sea forever. No one truly knows what to believe. Inside Canton's government offices, exhaustion settles heavily over everyone. Clerks copy emergency orders by candlelight until their wrists ache. Messengers arrive coated in road dust carrying contradictory reports from coastal defences. Officials argue over strategy while trying not to appear frightened before subordinates. The war has become administrative chaos as much as military conflict. Outside, ordinary people continue trying to survive. A mother hurries children through crowded alleys before evening curfews tighten. A fisherman repairs damaged nets beside the waterfront despite hearing distant cannon fire earlier that morning. An elderly tea seller complains bitterly that war disrupts business more effectively than rain ever could. His customers still laugh softly at that. Humour survives surprisingly long during unstable times. The British fleet maintains pressure along the coast, sometimes withdrawing temporarily, then returning elsewhere with alarming speed. This mobility frustrates Qing commanders profoundly. Traditional defensive thinking depends heavily upon fixed positions, fortified ports, and predictable territorial threats. But British naval warfare feels slippery. Warships appear where least expected. Coastal batteries fall under concentrated bombardment. Supply routes face disruption. Negotiations open briefly, collapse, then reopen again beneath entirely different circumstances. The rhythm exhausts everyone involved. You stand now atop a city wall overlooking part of the river, while distant thunder rolls across the sky. Except it is not thunder. British cannon fire echoes through the humid air. Smoke drifts low over the water into pale streaks while Chinese artillery responds unevenly from fortified positions near the shoreline. Crowds gather despite obvious danger because human beings always gather near danger eventually. Some spectators cheer wildly whenever Chinese guns fire. Others simply stare in silence. Many cannot fully process what they are witnessing. For centuries, Qing authority has appeared immense and permanent to most ordinary subjects. Imperial banners, examinations, ceremonies, and bureaucratic rituals reinforce a sense of ordered continuity stretching backward through generations. Now foreign warships challenge that certainty directly. Not everywhere at once, not completely, but enough to shake confidence. British commanders understand the psychological dimension of this conflict increasingly well. Military victories alone matter less than demonstrating superiority repeatedly before Chinese officials and civilians alike. Every successful bombardment sends a message beyond immediate tactical goals. Resistance appears futile. That message becomes deeply dangerous over time. Yet British forces also struggle with their own frustrations. negotiations with Qing authorities remain painfully slow and culturally tangled. Translators mistranslate nuances or deliberately soften difficult phrases. Mutual distrust poisons nearly every discussion. At times, the conflict resembles two civilizations arguing through fog. One British officer complains privately that Chinese officials refuse straightforward diplomacy. A Qing administrator writes angrily that foreigners behave without proper respect for hierarchy or law. Both perspectives contain fragments of truth. Neither side fully comprehends the emotional logic of the other. Inside the foreign factories, tension among the merchants shifts constantly between confidence and dread. Some believe British naval victories guarantee eventual success. Others fear being abandoned in hostile territory if negotiations fail catastrophically. Alcohol consumption rises noticeably. Late at night, the buildings smell of spilled liquor, candle wax, damp clothing, and unwashed bodies trapped too long inside anxious routines. Clerks gamble away portions of future earnings. Sailors brawl over insults magnified by heat and exhaustion. Letters from home become treasured objects passed carefully between trembling hands. One young merchant from Liverpool reportedly sleeps with loaded pistols beside his bed despite never having fired one before this war. Fear transforms people in quiet ways. Meanwhile, Canton's Chinese resident watched the foreign quarter with growing resentment and suspicion. To many locals, the conflict feels inseparable from the opium trade that already damaged communities and corrupted officials. British claims about trade rights sound hollow beside years of smuggling and addiction, yet others depend economically upon foreign commerce. Dock workers need cargo shipments, translators need contracts, merchants need international trade routes. Entire livelihoods now sit trapped between patriotism and survival. A Chinese intermediary working between foreign merchants and local officials faces particular strain. One careless phrase could ruin him politically. One accusation of collaboration could destroy his family's reputation permanently. He begins sleeping poorly. History often presses hardest upon people caught between worlds. As the conflict drags onward, violence becomes increasingly normalized around Canton. The first cannon bombardments shocked civilians deeply. By now, many residents identify distant artillery almost casually by sound alone. Heavy naval guns near the river, smaller field artillery farther inland, signal cannons from defensive positions. People adapt because they must. Still, certain moments break through emotional numbness. A shell strikes near a crowded dockside market one afternoon, scattering splintered wood and shattered pottery across the street. Several civilians die instantly. Survivors stumble through drifting smoke, searching desperately for relatives beneath overturned carts. Nearby, a British sailor watches the aftermath from his vessel through a spyglass and feels unexpectedly sick. Military reports later summarize the incident in two brief sentences. The human reality lasts much longer. Summer rain arrives suddenly again toward evening, hammering rooftops and washing blood into the gutters beside floating vegetable scraps and broken baskets. Canton's streets empty quickly beneath the storm. Lanterns glow warmly through paper windows while families gather indoors, listening to rainfall and distant gunfire. In Beijing, the Daoguang Emperor grows increasingly frustrated with the war's progress. Reports remain contradictory. Some officials promise eventual victory if resources increase. Others quietly advocate negotiation before greater humiliation occurs. No consensus survives for long. The empire feels too large and the crisis too unfamiliar. British representatives continue demanding expanded diplomatic access, compensation, and revised trade arrangements. Qing authorities still frame the conflict primarily around suppressing criminal behavior and restoring proper order. These positions barely overlap anymore, and beneath every negotiation rests the uncomfortable truth neither side wishes to admit fully. The war has already changed China, not completely, not permanently, but something important has cracked open. The old assumptions of effortless imperial superiority now face iron warships, industrial artillery, and a foreign power unwilling to remain politely confined at the edges of Chinese civilization. Canton feels this transformation first, in the rain-soaked streets, in exhausted offices, in crowded homes where families whisper anxiously beside flickering lamps. People begin sensing they are living through the beginning of something larger than a coastal dispute, something that may echo for generations. Far to the north, Beijing remains strangely quiet. Snow settles softly against tiled roofs inside the imperial city, while cold wind moves through bare winter trees along the palace walls. The canals freeze at the edges. Guards stamp their boots for warmth beneath grey skies that seem to press low over everything. At first glance, the capital hardly resembles a nation at war. That distance matters more than it should. You walk through long palace corridors smelling faintly of incense, old wood, and cold stone, while officials carry memorials tucked carefully inside embroidered sleeves. Somewhere beyond the walls, street vendors still sell steamed buns to early workers. Scholars continue preparing for examinations. Families gather around charcoal braziers against the northern cold. The empire continues functioning because empires must continue functioning. But beneath the routines of court life, confusion spread steadily. The Daoguang Emperor struggles to understand the true scale of the crisis unfolding far away along the southern coast. Reports arrive constantly, yet certainty never does. One official claims British forces remain limited and vulnerable. Another warns of unstoppable naval superiority. A third insists local commanders merely require more support and stricter discipline. Truth becomes tangled inside bureaucracy. That is one of the oldest problems in governance. No emperor, no matter how intelligent, can directly witness the realities unfolding across a territory as vast as Qing China. Information travels slowly through layered systems shaped by fear, ambition, and self-preservation. Officials soften failures to protect careers. Rivals exaggerate one another's mistakes. Victories expand slightly with each retelling. Reality arrives in fragments, and war punishes fragmented understanding. The emperor himself appears exhausted during these years. Contemporary accounts describe him as serious, diligent, and deeply burdened by responsibility. Unlike certain earlier Qing rulers who governed during periods of expansion and confidence, the Daoguang Emperor inherits mounting pressures from nearly every direction. Population growth strains resources, corruption weakens administration, natural disasters create recurring hardship. Now foreign military humiliation threatens imperial legitimacy itself. At night, perhaps he lies awake listening to winter wind against palace roofs, while wondering how events slipped so far beyond control. History rarely feels inevitable to those living through it. Inside court debates, sharp disagreements emerge over how Britain should even be understood. Certain officials still describe the foreigners using older tributary language meant for distant barbarian states seeking access to Chinese civilization. Others increasingly realize Britain operates according to entirely different assumptions about diplomacy and power. This conceptual gap slows every response, because before China can fight Britain effectively, many officials first need to understand what Britain actually is. An empire built upon a maritime commerce, industrial production, global finance, naval projection, expanding technological systems, aggressive treaty diplomacy. Not merely another peripheral kingdom seeking favour from the Son of Heaven. You sit now inside a dim government chamber while senior ministers debate policy beside flickering lantern light. Breath clouds faintly in the cold room. Tea cools untouched on lacquered tables, while maps of the coastline lie spread open before tired men struggling to interpret alarming reports. Some argue for uncompromising resistance. Others advocate negotiation before the situation worsens further. Several blame Commissioner Lin entirely for provoking conflict through excessive zeal. His exile has not ended the search for scapegoats. Court politics grows increasingly bitter as military setbacks continue. Yet removing Lin changes little. The deeper problems remain. Chinese coastal defences continue suffering from outdated weaponry, inconsistent training, logistical weaknesses, and fragmented command structures. Many local soldiers fight bravely, but bravery alone cannot compensate for industrial artillery and disciplined naval coordination. Some Qing officials slowly begin recognizing this reality with painful clarity. One memorial describes British ships moving like mountains upon the sea. Another warns that traditional assumptions about warfare no longer apply against such enemies. Still, adaptation proves difficult. Empires built upon long stability rarely change quickly. Beyond the palace walls, ordinary Beijing residents absorb the war through rumour and scattered announcements rather than direct experience. A tea seller hears that foreign devils possess cannons capable of destroying entire cities. A carriage driver insists the emperor will soon unleash overwhelming armies from the interior provinces. People invent certainty where information fails, and yet daily life continues with stubborn persistence. Street markets open beneath thin winter sunlight. Labourers haul coal through crowded alleys. Children chase one another beside frozen waterways while mothers scold them for torn clothing. Human routines survive astonishing amounts of political anxiety. Meanwhile, Britain expands pressure carefully along the Chinese coast. The strategy now extends beyond isolated retaliation for the opium seizure. British officials increasingly seek formal treaty concessions, reshaping the entire structure of foreign relations with China. Commercial access, diplomatic recognition, territorial footholds, legal protections. The war's objectives widen steadily. Back in London, public opinion remains divided, but gradually shifts towards support for stronger action. Reports of military success encourage imperial confidence. Newspapers portray Chinese resistance as backward obstruction against modern commerce and civilized diplomacy. These narratives simplify everything conveniently. Very few British readers fully confront the uncomfortable reality that the conflict originated from narcotic smuggling defended through military force. Nations rarely enjoy examining their own contradictions too closely. Still, some voices continue objecting. Politicians, missionaries, and reformers criticize the moral hypocrisy of fighting for opium profits while claiming civilizational superiority. Their arguments matter historically even though they fail to halt the war, because memory later becomes contested terrain. Who acted honourably? Who acted greedily? Who misunderstood whom? These questions will echo for generations. In Beijing, however, immediate survival matters more than future historical judgment. The emperor places commanders repeatedly searching for effective leadership. Coastal defences receive new orders. Emergency resources move southward through strained administrative systems. But distance keeps weakening coordination. A decision made inside the Forbidden City may take weeks or months to influence events near Canton. By then, circumstances have often changed entirely. British naval mobility exploits this slowness relentlessly. You stand now beside a frozen palace courtyard at dusk while snow begins falling once more through silent air. A court official pauses briefly beneath a lantern, rubbing tired eyes before continuing toward another late-night meeting. He has spent hours reviewing casualty reports from provinces he may never personally visit. Somewhere far to the south, families there bury the dead. This disconnect between centre and frontier shapes the entire conflict. For the Qing court, the war initially appears manageable because the empire itself remains enormous and internally functioning. Beijing does not collapse. Most provinces continue ordinary administration. Harvests continue, taxes continue. Yet psychologically, something corrosive has begun. The aura of unquestioned imperial supremacy weakens each time foreign ships defeat Chinese defences. Each military setback damages not only territory or prestige, but confidence in the dynasty's ability to preserve cosmic and political order. That confidence has anchored Qing legitimacy for generations. Without it, dangerous questions emerge quietly beneath the surface. Questions about corruption, competence, reform, survival. Questions that will not disappear once the cannons finally fall silent. The Yangtze River stretches ahead like a road into the heart of China. You stand aboard a British steam-powered vessel moving slowly through brown river water beneath a pale overcast sky. Smoke drifts backward from the funnel while paddle wheels churn steadily beside the hull. The air smells of coal, wet rope, river mud, and unwashed uniforms drying poorly in the damp heat. Along the distant banks, villagers stop their work to stare. Some shield their eyes against the light, others simply freeze beside fishing nets or rice fields, watching the foreign ships move inland with impossible confidence. Many have never seen anything like this before. That reaction matters deeply. The British campaign is changing now. Coastal bombardments alone no longer seem sufficient to force Qing concessions. Instead, British commanders decide to strike farther north and deeper inland, targeting economically vital regions connected by China's great river systems. The strategy is brutally logical. Threaten the arteries of the empire itself. The Yangtze is not merely a river, it is movement, grain, commerce, taxation, communication, survival. Cities rise beside it, markets depend upon it. Entire administrative systems flow along its waters, and now foreign warships enter those waters carrying artillery and imperial demands. The psychological shock spreads quickly. You pass crowded river towns where ordinary life suddenly collides with modern warfare. Laundry still hangs between wooden houses. Tea shops still serve customers. Temple bells still ring softly through humid mornings. Then cannon smoke rolls across the river. Panic moves faster than official orders. People flee carrying bundles of clothing and cooking pots balanced awkwardly against their shoulders. Merchants rush to hide silver or valuable records before soldiers arrive. Mothers pull frightened children indoors while dogs bark wildly through narrowing streets. War feels especially cruel when it interrupts ordinary afternoons. British forces capture strategic positions methodically as they advance. Some Qing garrisons resist fiercely. Others collapse under bombardment before close fighting even begins. Accounts differ about certain engagements, but the broader pattern remains unmistakable. The technological imbalance continues reshaping every encounter. British naval guns outrange many Chinese defences. Steam power allows movement independent of favourable wind conditions. Coordinated artillery fire shatters fortifications built for older styles of warfare. Yet British troops also grow increasingly uneasy as they move deeper into unfamiliar territory. The scale of China overwhelms many of them. River traffic alone seems endless. Thousands of boats crowd the waterways carrying grain, timber, ceramics, vegetables, salt, and passengers between sprawling settlements larger than most European towns. The population density unsettles foreign observers accustomed to very different landscapes. One British officer later writes that China feels without visible ending. There is admiration inside that observation and fear. Because military victories along the coast are one thing. Occupying or controlling China itself is another matter entirely. Most British leaders understand this. The war aims remain coercive rather than fully imperial in the territorial sense. Britain seeks concessions, trade access, indemnities, and diplomatic leverage, not outright conquest of the Qing Empire, at least for now. Still, the violence intensifies as the campaign pushes inland. You walk through the aftermath of a captured riverside fort while humid air hangs thick with smoke and burned wood. Splintered cannon carriages lie overturned beside shattered walls blackened by artillery fire. Flies gather quickly around abandoned equipment and the dead. Nearby, British soldiers search storehouses while Chinese prisoners sit exhausted beneath armed guard. Some stare silently at the ground. Others glance towards the foreign troops with expressions difficult to read. Hatred, perhaps. Confusion, shame. Possibly all three together. A British Marine pauses beside a fallen Qing banner, partly soaked in river water. For a moment he feels unexpectedly sad. The man carrying it may have been terrified only minutes earlier. Now he is simply gone. History often compresses such moments into military summaries, but the human mind rarely experiences war as strategy alone. Further inland, local officials struggle desperately to maintain order. as refugees move between towns carrying contradictory stories about the foreign advance. Some rumors describe unstoppable iron ships destroying entire cities. Others claim the invaders remain few and vulnerable away from the coast. Communication fractures under pressure. Meanwhile, the Qing court continues replacing commanders and issuing urgent defensive orders, but coordination weakens as British mobility increases. Certain regional officials hesitate to commit forces fully, fearing blame if campaigns fail. Others exaggerate successes to preserve imperial favour. The bureaucracy strains visibly now. You can feel it in the paperwork piling across administrative desks lit late into the night by smoking oil lamps. Ink freezes less often here than in Beijing, but exhaustion remains universal. Couriers arrive drenched from rainstorms or coated in road dust after desperate journeys between provinces. Everyone waits for instructions. Everyone fears making the wrong decision. As British forces move northward, the city of Nanjing gradually emerges as a strategic focal point. Once the capital of earlier dynasties, it remains symbolically and economically vital. Control of the Yangtze corridor threatens grain transport systems essential to feeding Beijing itself. This possibility alarms the Qing court profoundly. The war no longer feels distant, and perhaps most dangerous of all, British victories begin influencing perceptions inside China beyond immediate battle zones. Confidence in Qing military strength weakens among civilians, local elites, and even certain officials. That erosion of confidence spreads quietly. A scholar in Jiangsu province privately questions whether the dynasty still possesses the mandate of heaven after repeated humiliations by foreign powers. A merchant wonders if cooperation with foreigners may prove safer than resistance. Secret societies interpret the chaos as evidence of weakening imperial authority. The war opens emotional cracks wider than anyone intended. Still, resistance continues. Chinese soldiers fight fiercely in many engagements despite inadequate equipment and inconsistent leadership. Civilians organize local defenses. River barriers are constructed hurriedly from chains, sunken boats, and improvised fortifications. Not everyone submits passively before foreign power, but courage alone cannot easily reverse industrial military advantages once they appear repeatedly across multiple campaigns. One evening along the Yangtze, heavy rain traps British troops inside a captured riverside compound. Uniforms hang drying beside dim lantern light while water drips steadily through damaged roofing. A young soldier writes a letter home describing the endless river, the strange food, and the unsettling realization that the war feels larger every week. Nearby, a Chinese family shelters silently inside a storage cellar after fleeing bombardment earlier that day. The father listens to foreign voices overhead and wonders whether the empire he grew up trusting still understands how to protect its people. Outside, the river keeps moving eastward through darkness, toward Nanjing, toward negotiation, toward a peace neither side will fully accept in their hearts. By the summer of 1842, exhaustion hangs over the war like damp heat before a storm. You stand near the banks of the Yangtze, watching British warships anchor ominously within reach of Nanjing, their dark hulls reflected in slow-moving water beneath a pale grey sky. Smoke drifts lazily from steam funnels. Sailors move across the decks with practiced calm while Chinese observers gather silently along distant walls and embankments. The city waits. So does the empire. Nanjing carries enormous symbolic weight inside Chinese history. Dynasties have risen here before. Scholars have studied beneath its roofs for centuries. Merchant wealth flows through its streets. Ancient walls stretch across the landscape with stubborn grandeur, though now they face foreign artillery from the river below. The psychological pressure upon the Qing court becomes unbearable. British forces do not need to destroy Nanjing entirely to make their point. The mere threat against such a critical city shakes confidence at every level of government. Grain transport toward the north feels vulnerable. Trade networks face disruption. Further military resistance risks deeper humiliation and economic disaster. negotiation finally becomes unavoidable. Inside Qing administrative circles, the mood grows grim and divided. Some officials still advocate continued resistance despite repeated defeats. Others privately admit the empire cannot currently match British naval and artillery capabilities. The Daoguang Emperor himself appears emotionally worn down by years of contradictory reports, failed defences, and mounting pressure. Peace now feels less like choice and more like surrender to reality. British representatives understand their advantage clearly. They arrive at negotiations carrying demands shaped not merely by wartime events but by broader imperial ambitions: compensation for destroyed opium, opening additional ports to foreign trade, formal diplomatic equality, territorial concessions, fixed tariffs limiting Chinese control over commerce. The balance of power inside these talks feels unmistakable. You imagine the negotiation rooms heavy with humidity and restrained hostility. Interpreters move carefully between languages, carrying phrases burdened with cultural misunderstanding. Tea cools untouched beside stacks of documents. Outside, guards stand watch while river traffic continues uneasily through the summer haze. No one mistakes this for reconciliation. The Treaty of Nanjing emerges from these discussions in August 1842. It becomes the first of what later generations in China will call the unequal treaties. The terms cut deeply. China agrees to pay a large indemnity covering destroyed opium and war expenses. 5 treaty ports open to British trade and residents, including Shanghai, Ningbo, Fuzhou, Xiamen, and Canton. Tariff systems become increasingly constrained. Most dramatically, Hong Kong Island is ceded permanently to Britain. The Qing Empire has not been conquered, but it has been forced open. That distinction matters historically, though it offers limited comfort at the time. When news spreads through different parts of China, reactions vary sharply. Some officials feel relief that the fighting may finally end. Merchants hope commerce will stabilize. Coastal communities devastated by warfare simply want peace. Others experience the treaty as humiliation. A scholar reading the terms by candlelight in Suzhou reportedly weeps openly at the territorial concession. A former soldier mutters bitterly that the foreigners now receive rewards for poisoning the empire with opium. In tea houses and market streets, people debate whether Qing officials negotiated wisely or surrendered too easily. No clear consensus survives. Yet beneath the arguments lies a shared unease. Something fundamental has shifted. For Britain, the treaty appears a triumph of military pressure and commercial diplomacy. Newspapers celebrate expanded trade opportunities and imperial prestige. Politicians praise the opening of China to international commerce. Merchants anticipate enormous profits flowing through the new treaty ports. The language used in Britain often sounds optimistic, even progressive. Trade, modernization, access, civilization. Words can soften violence surprisingly well. Still, not everyone in Britain celebrates comfortably. Critics continue pointing out the uncomfortable moral origins of the conflict. Fighting a war connected to narcotics trafficking remains difficult to defend cleanly even after victory, but empires rarely pause long over ethical contradictions when strategic gains appear successful. Along the Chinese coast, British sailors celebrate survival more than politics. Many are exhausted after years of disease, combat, and harsh conditions far from home. A marine recovering from fever drinks heavily aboard ship while staring towards the shoreline through evening mist. Another quietly admits he never understood the war fully in the first place. Most soldiers do not shape policy. They simply carry it across oceans. Meanwhile, the treaty ports begin changing almost immediately. Shanghai especially starts transforming with startling speed. Foreign merchants, diplomats, missionaries, translators, sailors, adventurers, and fortune seekers arrive carrying commercial ambition and cultural assumptions from across the world. Warehouses rise beside traditional neighborhoods. Western ships crowd the riverfront beside Chinese junks and sampan. At first, the changes seem local, temporary perhaps, but they are not temporary. You walk now through a Shanghai street shortly after the treaty's implementation. Rainwater gathers in uneven stones beneath passing sedan chairs. Chinese shopkeepers watch foreign newcomers cautiously from narrow storefronts smelling of tea leaves, tobacco, and wet wood nearby. British merchants discuss land agreements beside imported furniture and shipping ledgers. The atmosphere feels uncertain rather than openly hostile. Curiosity mixes with resentment. Opportunity mixes with fear. Some Chinese merchants adapt quickly, recognizing profitable possibilities within the new trade system. Others view the expanding foreign presence as contamination spreading through the old order. Most ordinary residents simply try navigating changes that they never requested. History rarely asks permission before restructuring daily life, and opium itself remains unresolved. This is crucial. The Treaty of Nanjing does not fully legalize the opium trade. Despite popular misconception, the drug continues existing in a grey zone of smuggling, corruption, and unofficial tolerance. British officials increasingly distance themselves rhetorically from direct narcotics involvement, while continuing benefiting from the broader commercial openings created by the war. The contradiction persists. Inside Qing leadership circles, deeper anxieties now emerge about the empire's future. The military defeats revealed alarming technological weaknesses. Coastal defences proved outdated. Diplomatic assumptions failed catastrophically. Administrative coordination struggled under modern warfare pressures. Certain officials begin quietly discussing reform. Others cling harder to tradition. These debates will shape China for generations. One evening in Nanjing after the treaty signing, a light rain falls against ancient walls while exhausted negotiators finally disperse into the darkness. Somewhere nearby, a servant clears untouched tea from a table where empires just reshaped one another through force and paperwork. No celebration fills the streets, only tiredness and a strange silence settling over the river. The First Opium War has ended officially, but the deeper conflict between China and the expanding industrial powers of the West has only begun. Shanghai smells of wet timber, coal smoke, river mud, and possibility. You arrive in the city not long after the Treaty of Nanjing reshapes the coastline, and already the old rhythms are changing. Along the Huangpu River, Chinese cargo boats drift beside towering foreign ships carrying flags from Britain, America, France, and other distant nations. Dock workers shout over one another through fog and drizzle while cranes creak under the weight of tea chests. Silk bundles, machinery, and furniture. Everything feels unfinished. Temporary warehouses rise beside centuries-old neighbourhoods. Dirt roads turn to mud beneath horse carts and sedan chairs. Translators hurry between meetings carrying papers sealed in different languages none of the participants entirely trust. The treaty ports are becoming strange hybrid worlds. Shanghai changes fastest of all. Before the war, it had already been an important commercial centre, but now foreign merchants see something large awaiting here. The city sits near the mouth of the Yangtze, connected to vast inland trade networks stretching across eastern China. Money moves through Shanghai naturally, like water following gravity. Foreign business interests moving quickly to follow it. You walk along the growing Bund where European-style buildings begin appearing beside Chinese architecture. Brick warehouses stand beside tea houses glowing warmly through paper windows. British traders in dark wool coats pass Chinese porters balancing cargo across bamboo poles. American merchants argue over shipping contracts while nearby cooks prepare noodles in steaming iron pots. The sounds never fully settle. Hammers striking wood, river bells, foreign accents colliding with local dialects, dogs barking beneath wagon wheels, rainwater dripping steadily from tiled roofs after another humid storm. At night the city glimmers uneasily. Oil lamps reflect across muddy streets while music drifts from taverns, catering to sailors and merchants. Foreign residents gather in clubs smelling of cigar smoke, brandy, and damp upholstery. They complain about mosquitoes, business rivals, and the difficulty of understanding China, yet many are fascinated too. Some collect Chinese paintings obsessively, Others hire tutors to learn basic phrases. A few wander the city with genuine curiosity, though often filtered through layers of cultural arrogance they barely recognize in themselves. Meanwhile, Chinese residents observe the newcomers just as carefully. A local shopkeeper notices how foreigners walk quickly, speak loudly, and seem uncomfortable with silence. A young translator studies English phrases late into the night beside flickering candlelight, because language now means opportunity. A wealthy merchant cautiously explores partnerships with foreign firms while privately worrying about social reputation. The city becomes a place where ambition overrides certainty. That atmosphere attracts people from everywhere, sailors escaping debts, missionaries chasing spiritual purpose, adventurers seeking fortune, Chinese laborers fleeing rural hardship, scholars curious about Western science, criminals hiding beneath the anonymity of rapid growth. Shanghai absorbs them all. The foreign settlements themselves develop peculiar identities. British areas feel disciplined and commercial, filled with banks, warehouses, and shipping offices. American merchants bring different business habits and cultural assumptions. French districts gradually develop quieter tree-lined streets with churches and cafes. But beneath these visible divisions lies a more important separation. Foreigners increasingly live under their own legal systems inside treaty port zones. This principle, known as extraterritoriality, grows from agreements following the war. Foreign nationals accused of crimes in China are often tried by their own authorities rather than Qing courts. To many Western governments, this arrangement protects citizens from unfamiliar and potentially unfair legal systems. To many Chinese observers, it feels like national humiliation made permanent. Two societies now occupy the same city while operating under different rules. That tension settles into daily life. You stand inside a crowded tea house one rainy evening, listening to the merchants discuss recent developments over small porcelain cups. The room smells of damp clothing, tobacco, and jasmine tea. Outside, carriage wheels splash through muddy streets while foreign lanterns glow faintly through the mist. One man complains that foreigners behave as though China belongs to them already. Another shrugs and points out that business profits have improved dramatically since the ports opened. A third says quietly that both things may be true. Nobody answers immediately. The emotional atmosphere surrounding the treaty ports remains complicated because the economic changes are real. Trade expands rapidly. New goods circulate through Chinese markets. Employment opportunities emerge for translators, dock workers, craftsmen, and merchants connected to foreign commerce. But prosperity arrives unevenly, and always beside resentment, opium continues flowing through these ports too. Despite the war supposedly ending the dispute, the drug trade remains deeply embedded within the new commercial order. Smuggling networks adapt rather than disappear. Corrupt officials still accept payments. Foreign merchants often maintain careful distance publicly while private business arrangements continue behind closed doors. The smoke never fully leaves the city. In certain districts, opium dens operate quietly behind carved wooden doors marked only by subtle signs recognizable to regular customers. Inside, the rooms remain dim and warm. Pipes rest beside lacquered trays while exhausted men recline against cushions listening to distant rain and muffled street sounds. Some are wealthy merchants. Others are laborers spending wages they cannot afford to lose. The war changed political structures faster than human habits. Meanwhile, Christian missionaries begin arriving in greater numbers through the treaty ports. Some genuinely wish to help local communities through education and medical care. Others carry assumptions about Chinese civilization shaped by imperial confidence and religious certainty. The encounters are often awkward. A missionary doctor treats patients suffering from illnesses local remedies fail to cure. Nearby, a Confucian scholar dismisses foreign religion as simplistic barbarian superstition. Children gather outside churches mostly because foreign singing sounds strange and interesting. Curiosity and distrust continue dancing together. One evening, a British merchant walks alone beside the river after heavy rain. Fog curls above the dark water while distant ship lanterns sway gently in the current. He thinks about how quickly everything has changed since the war began. 10 years earlier, foreigners were tightly restricted in Canton. Now entire districts operate under foreign influence inside China itself. He feels victorious and strangely lonely because treaty port life carries isolation alongside opportunity. Many foreigners remain temporary figures floating above local society rather than fully belonging anywhere. They build clubs, churches, racetracks, and newspapers partly to recreate fragments of home in unfamiliar surroundings. But home itself changes while they are gone. Shanghai changes them too, and the city keeps expanding. Construction spreads outward, trade volume increases, cultural boundaries blur slightly in some places, while hardening in others. Chinese elites study foreign technology cautiously. Foreign businessmen study Chinese markets hungrily. The world grows more connected here, and more unequal. Along the waterfront, rain begins falling once again through smoky evening air. Dock workers pull tarps over cargo while riverboats disappear gradually into the mist. Somewhere nearby, an interpreter switches effortlessly between English and Chinese during tense negotiations neither side entirely understands. The Opium War may be over, but its consequences are only beginning to unfold across these restless streets beside the river. Language becomes its own battlefield in the treaty ports. You hear it everywhere now in Shanghai, Canton, Ningbo, and the other newly opened cities. English spoken too quickly beneath heavy rain outside shipping offices, Cantonese shouted across crowded docks, Mandarin exchanged formally inside government compounds, Portuguese phrases lingering from older trading networks, French hymns drifting from chapel windows at dusk. Words move constantly between worlds that do not fully trust one another, and in the middle stand the interpreters. They are some of the most important people in China now, though history often forgets them. Young men balancing dictionaries beside candlelight, merchants' assistants memorizing foreign legal phrases, scholars learning strange alphabets after years spent mastering classical Chinese texts. Translation becomes survival. One mistranslated sentence can derail negotiations, provoke violence, or quietly reshape treaties affecting millions. You sit inside a cramped office overlooking the Shanghai waterfront while an exhausted interpreter works between a British merchant and a Qing official arguing about tariffs. Sweat darkens the collar of his robe despite the evening breeze drifting through open windows. Papers cover the table in several languages at once. The merchant insists the agreement permits lower duties. The official insists the merchant misunderstands the agreement entirely. The interpreter understands both positions, and privately believes both men are impossible. Still, he continues carefully because his livelihood depends upon making incompatible worlds communicate long enough to conduct business. Outside, river fog thickens around anchored ships. The treaty ports continue growing faster than anyone predicted. Foreign banks open beside tea warehouses, mission schools appear near traditional markets, printing presses produce newspapers in multiple languages carrying rumours, political arguments, shipping notices, and missionary essays about salvation. The cities feel intellectually crowded now. Ideas move alongside cargo. Christian missionaries become increasingly visible within this changing landscape. Some arrive filled with genuine compassion and curiosity. Others arrive carrying absolute certainty about the moral superiority of Western civilization. Often the two impulses exist inside the same person. You walk through a modest mission compound one cool autumn morning. The courtyard smells of damp earth and medicinal herbs drying near open windows. Inside a small clinic, a missionary doctor treats infections and injuries using techniques unfamiliar to many local patients. A mother brings her feverish child reluctantly after traditional remedies fail. The doctor speaks almost no Chinese. The mother speaks no English. An interpreter bridges the silence between them. These encounters happen thousands of times across the treaty ports and beyond. Sometimes they create meaningful human connection. Sometimes misunderstanding, sometimes resentment wrapped politely inside gratitude. Missionaries established schools teaching mathematics, science, geography, and foreign languages alongside Christian doctrine. Certain Chinese families enroll children because practical education matters more than religion. Others avoid the schools entirely, fearing cultural contamination or social disgrace. No single Chinese's response occurs. That complexity often disappears in later retellings. Some Chinese intellectuals grow genuinely curious about Western technology and scientific methods after the Opium War reveals alarming military weaknesses. Others conclude foreign influence itself represents the greater danger. Most ordinary people remain focused on more immediate concerns like food prices, family obligations, and surviving another difficult year. History changes unevenly across societies. Meanwhile, foreign communities inside the treaty ports continue constructing small versions of home. Churches ring bells through humid mornings. Newspapers complain about local sanitation. Imported furniture arrives aboard ships carrying familiar fabrics and books from Europe. Yet many foreigners feel increasingly unsettled despite material success. China refuses to become easily understandable. A British missionary writes privately that the country feels ancient beyond conversion. An American trader complains that every confident assumption he carried eastward has gradually collapsed. A French priest spends years studying Chinese philosophy, only to emerge more uncertain about his own beliefs. Cultural contact changes both sides slowly, though not equally. Power remains heavily unbalanced after the war. Foreign gunboats still anchor offshore as quiet reminders behind every treaty discussion. Extraterritorial privileges continue separating foreign residents from Chinese legal authority. Commercial influence expands steadily through the ports. Many Chinese observers recognize this clearly. You stand inside a tea house one rainy evening, where several local scholars discuss recent developments in low, careful voices. Candle smoke drifts through the room while outside. Carriage wheels hiss softly through wet streets. One scholar argues that Western science must be studied if China hopes to defend itself. Another insists foreign technology can never compensate for moral decay introduced through opium and imperial arrogance. A third says softly that perhaps the empire must learn from enemies without becoming them. That sentence lingers in the silence afterward, because it touches the deeper question emerging after the war. How does a civilization respond after discovering vulnerability it never imagined possible? The Qing state still governs enormous territory. The dynasty has not collapsed, yet confidence has weakened. Foreign influence expands visibly along the coast while internal pressures continue building across the countryside, and opium remains everywhere. Despite official restrictions, the drug trade flourishes within the gaps opened by treaty systems and corruption networks. British merchants often distance themselves publicly from direct involvement now, preferring cleaner commercial language. But the profits continue flowing quietly through banking houses and shipping firms. Chinese officials know this. So do ordinary citizens watching addiction spread through neighborhoods and villages. The bitterness deepens. One evening, a young Chinese translator walks home through Shanghai after finishing work for a foreign trading company. Rain has just ended. Lantern light reflects across puddles, while river mist curls between buildings along the waterfront. He carries foreign books beneath his arm. His father disapproves of the job, believing cooperation with foreigners dishonors the family, yet the wages support everyone at home. The young man himself feels divided constantly. He admires certain aspects of Western science and navigation. He despises the humiliation China suffered during the war. Inside him, admiration and resentment grow together. That emotional contradiction will shape an entire generation. Elsewhere in the city, a British missionary sits awake late into the night writing letters home beside a flickering lamp. He describes China as beautiful, exhausting, brilliant, frustrating, and wounded. He believes sincerely that Christianity can help heal the country, but he barely notices how often his language assumes Chinese civilization requires saving by foreigners. Good intentions can still carry empire inside them. Along the docks, sailors unload more cargo beneath grey dawn skies, while interpreters shout instructions between languages. Tea moves outward toward Europe. Manufactured goods move inward towards China. Silver, ideas, technologies, ambitions and prejudices circulate endlessly through the treaty ports. The world feels smaller here now, and far more unstable, because beneath the commercial growth and cultural encounters lies an unresolved truth neither side can comfortably escape. The peace created after the First Opium War has not produced mutual respect, only uneasy coexistence beneath the shadow of unequal power. By the middle of the 1850s, the peace already feels exhausted. You sense it in the treaty ports first, in the sharpness of conversations inside foreign clubs, in the suspicion lingering behind official meetings, in the growing impatience of British and French diplomats who believe China still resists the full opening promised after the First War. The treaties ended fighting. They did not end resentment. Shanghai continues expanding rapidly beneath clouds of coal smoke and river fog. Foreign warehouses multiply along the waterfront. Steamships arrive carrying textiles, machinery, missionaries, bankers, and newspapers full of imperial confidence. Yet many Western officials complain constantly that the Qing government remains difficult and uncooperative. Trade restrictions persist in certain regions. Diplomatic access remains limited. Chinese authorities still resist fully legalizing opium imports despite the practical impossibility of stopping them. To foreign powers, China appears stubborn. To many Chinese officials, the foreigners appear endlessly demanding. Neither side trusts the peace anymore, and beyond the treaty ports, the Qing Empire faces catastrophe from within. The Taiping Rebellion has erupted across southern and central China with terrifying force. Entire provinces descend into violence as millions become trapped inside one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. Cities burn, refugees crowd the roads. Local administrations collapse beneath rebellion and famine. The Qing state grows dangerously overstretched. Foreign governments watch carefully. Some diplomats sympathize with Qing weakness during the rebellion. Others see opportunity in it. Britain and France increasingly believe stronger pressure can force additional concessions while the dynasty struggles for survival. Then comes the Arrow incident. On the surface, it appears almost absurdly small. A Chinese-owned ship registered under a British flag is boarded by Qing authorities near Canton in October 1856. Chinese officials arrest several crew members on suspicion of piracy and smuggling. The ship's British registration may have already expired. Accounts differ about certain details, but one issue becomes politically explosive. British officials claim Chinese authorities insulted the British flag during the boarding. That symbolic insult matters enormously within imperial culture to many Qing officials. However, the case involves routine law enforcement against Chinese subjects operating suspicious vessels. The foreigners, they believe, are exploiting technicalities to interfere with Chinese sovereignty yet again. Both sides seize upon the incident because deeper tension already exists waiting beneath the surface. You stand beside the Pearl River during those uneasy days while humid air presses heavily against the city. Canton feels tense in a familiar way now. Crowds gather near government compounds whispering rumours about foreign retaliation. Merchants quietly secure valuables. Soldiers reinforce defensive positions beside old fortifications repaired after the previous war. People remember what British naval power looked like the first time. Foreign diplomats demand apologies and expanded concessions. Qing officials resist. The arguments escalate rapidly because neither side wants merely legal clarification anymore. Britain seeks broader diplomatic leverage and greater access throughout China. Qing authorities fear endless surrender disguised as negotiation. Underneath the formal language, the struggle concerns dignity as much as policy. British representatives frame the conflict around treaty rights, legal protections, and respect for national symbols. Chinese officials frame it around sovereignty, foreign arrogance, and resistance against humiliation. Again, both sides believe themselves justified. And again, ordinary civilians will pay much of the price. British naval forces soon bombard Canton after negotiations collapse. The sounds return to the city like old nightmares waking suddenly after years of uneasy sleep. Cannon fire rolling across river water, smoke drifting through crowded streets, walls shaking beneath artillery impacts. You move through narrow alleys where residents hurry indoors carrying children and bundles of possessions. Rain begins falling lightly through the smoke while market stalls stand abandoned beneath torn awnings. Somewhere nearby, shattered glass crunches beneath running footsteps. The war has returned. This second conflict unfolds differently from the first almost immediately, because France joins Britain after the killing of a French missionary in inland China. The French government uses the incident partly to pursue its own expanding influence within East Asia. Now multiple foreign powers coordinate military pressure against the Qing Empire. For many Chinese observers, the distinctions between foreign nations blur together into a single threatening force arriving from the sea with cannons and demands. Inside Canton, local governor Ye Mingchen becomes a central figure during the crisis. Unlike some Qing officials who favour compromise, he adopts a rigid, defiant posture toward foreign pressure. He refuses many diplomatic requests outright and believes resistance remains necessary despite military risks. Certain Chinese citizens admire his firmness deeply. Foreign diplomats consider him obstructive and dangerous. History will judge him ambiguously, like so many people trapped inside impossible conflicts. You imagine you're late at night inside government headquarters while rain taps steadily against the roof. Candlelight flickers across maps and official documents scattered beside untouched tea growing cold. Outside, the city waits anxiously for whatever comes next. Perhaps he knows already that military balance favours the foreigners. Perhaps he simply believes surrender without resistance would wound the empire even more deeply. Either way, the pressure keeps building. British and French forces eventually capture Canton after fierce bombardment and urban fighting. Foreign troops move through streets filled with smoke, debris, frightened civilians, and exhausted defenders. Some soldiers behave with discipline, others loot recklessly or lash out under stress and confusion. War strips away moral certainty very quickly once cities fall. A British Marine pauses inside a damaged temple staring awkwardly at shattered statues he does not understand. Nearby, a Chinese family hides silently behind collapsed walls waiting for the gunfire to stop. Outside, rainwater carries ash through the gutters toward the river. Governor Yi is captured and later exiled. Foreign powers establish greater direct influence over Canton's administration. Once again, military force reshapes political reality faster than diplomacy ever managed. And still the conflict widens. British and French leaders now seek not only local concessions but comprehensive treaty revisions, granting expanded diplomatic rights, legal protections, inland travel permissions, and commercial access throughout China. The Qing Empire, weakened already by internal rebellion and administrative strain, struggles desperately to resist. Yet resistance continues because humiliation itself has become unbearable to many officials and civilians alike. That emotional reality matters profoundly. People can endure hardship surprisingly long. Humiliation is harder. As night settles over the battered city, the river reflects scattered firelight beneath drifting smoke and monsoon clouds. Foreign warships anchor confidently offshore while Chinese civilians search through damaged neighborhoods for missing relatives, salvaged belongings, and signs that ordinary life might somehow return again. But the peace created after the First War has fully collapsed now, and the next stage will reach far beyond Canton. The road to Beijing feels impossibly long. You travel north with British and French forces through landscapes already scarred by rebellion and famine and administrative collapse. Dust rises from exhausted roads beneath pale autumn skies. Horses breathe heavily in the cold morning air. Soldiers march beside supply wagons creaking under ammunition, medical equipment, and damp wool blankets that never fully dry. The Second Opium War has widened into something larger than trade disputes now. Foreign powers want permanent diplomatic access to the imperial capital itself. They want revised treaties, legalized opium commerce, expanded missionary protections, and greater freedom of movement across China. The Qing court still resist yielding completely, and so the war keeps moving closer towards the symbolic center of the empire. Earlier negotiations at Tianjin had briefly produced agreements between the Qing government and foreign powers, but tensions erupted again when Anglo-French diplomats attempted travelling toward Beijing under treaty terms, and Chinese forces resisted their advance near the Taku forts. Violence returned quickly. Humiliation deepened further on both sides. By 1860, British and French commanders decide upon direct military pressure against the Qing court itself. The march northward feels grim rather than triumphant for many participants. You pass villages hollowed by hardship where fields lie neglected beside damaged homes. Refugees move silently along the roads carrying bedding, cooking pots, and thin children wrapped against the cold. The Taiping Rebellion still burns across huge sections of China, draining Qing resources and filling entire regions with fear. Now foreign armies move through the same wounded landscape. A British officer later writes that parts of northern China felt exhausted before we arrived. There is something bleakly honest in that observation. War rarely enters healthy societies gently. As foreign troops approach Beijing, panic spreads unevenly through the capital. Some residents flee with valuables loaded onto carts or carried across bent shoulders. Others insist the imperial armies will repel the invaders as dynasties always have before. The Xianfeng emperor himself struggles under enormous pressure. Unlike his predecessors, he governs during cascading crises, internal rebellion, foreign invasion, administrative strain, financial weakness, failing confidence. The empire feels unstable in ways difficult to conceal anymore. Inside palace compounds, officials debate desperately beneath dim lantern light while autumn wind rattles against windows. Some argue for negotiation, others demand continued resistance regardless of military realities. Messages arrive late, orders conflict, rumours spread faster than certainty, and still the foreign armies advance. The Battle of Palikao near Beijing becomes another devastating defeat for Qing forces. Allied troops equipped with modern artillery and disciplined formations overwhelm defenders despite fierce resistance in places. Smoke rolls across open ground while cavalry movements dissolve into confusion beneath concentrated gunfire. Many Chinese soldiers fight bravely. Bravery changes little against industrial military systems once momentum collapses. Soon afterward, British and French forces enter the outskirts of Beijing itself. The psychological shock is immense. For centuries, the imperial capital represented the heart of political and cosmic order within Qing ideology. Foreign armies reaching its approaches feels almost unthinkable to many Chinese observers. Some residents reportedly wander the streets in stunned silence, watching unfamiliar soldiers move through districts once considered untouchable. Then events grow darker still. During negotiations, several European prisoners captured by Qing forces die after brutal treatment and imprisonment. Accounts of torture and death spread rapidly through the Allied command. Rage follows. British High Commissioner Lord Elgin decides upon a punishment intended to strike symbolically at the Qing court rather than ordinary civilians. The target becomes the Yuanming Yuan, the old summer palace. Even now, the name carries grief inside Chinese historical memory. You approach the palace complex beneath cold October light filtering weakly through smoke and autumn haze. The grounds stretch outward with astonishing beauty, lakes reflecting willow trees, marble bridges arching across still water, pavilions painted in delicate colours, libraries filled with rare manuscripts, gardens designed for contemplation and imperial retreat. European visitors later describe the place with almost reverent amazement. It represents centuries of artistic labour, imperial wealth, scholarship, and cultural refinement gathered into one sprawling landscape. Then the destruction begins. At first there is looting. French and British soldiers move through the halls carrying silks, porcelain, clocks, jade carvings, paintings, and gold ornaments. Some officers attempt maintaining discipline, others participate openly in the chaos. Priceless objects disappear into pockets, crates, and saddlebags beneath the cold autumn sky. The atmosphere turns feverish quickly. A French soldier later admits the sale of beauty inside the palace made the plundering feel unreal, almost dreamlike. Another describes men fighting one another over stolen treasures, while smoke drifted through carved wooden corridors. Human beings become strange around concentrated wealth and collapsing restraint. Then come the fires. Lord Elgin orders the destruction of the old summer palace as a retaliation for the prisoner deaths and as a demonstration of imperial power. British troops carry out much of the burning systematically over several days. You stand at the edge of the gardens, watching flames consume lacquered halls beneath darkening skies. Smoke rises thick and black into the cold air while painted beams collapse inward with showers of sparks. The smell is overwhelming. Burning wood, silk, paper, oil, history itself turning to ash. Chinese witnesses watch in horror from nearby distances. Some weep openly, others stand frozen in silence. Inside the inferno vanish libraries, artworks, family heirlooms, ceremonial treasures, and architectural space shaped across generations. Not merely property, but memory. The destruction becomes one of the defining emotional wounds of the Opium Wars. Even certain foreign observers feel uneasy afterward. A British officer privately describes the burning as a melancholy victory. Victor Hugo, writing later from France, condemns the destruction fiercely, calling Britain and France two bandits entering the palace together. Not everyone inside the imperial powers feels pride, but the damage is done. The Xianfeng Emperor flees Beijing before the Allied arrival, retreating northward into exile and illness. Qing negotiators, left behind under immense pressure, eventually sign the Convention of Beijing in 1860. The agreements deepen foreign privileges further. Additional treaty ports open. Opium trade gains effective legalization. Foreign diplomats receive permanent residence rights in Beijing. Kowloon territory is ceded to Britain. The unequal treaty system expands again through military coercion. And beneath the political outcomes lies something more difficult to measure. Humiliation settling into cultural memory. As night falls over the smouldering ruins of the summer palace, ash drifts slowly across dark water where imperial gardens once reflected moonlight peacefully. Soldiers move quietly through the wreckage, carrying stolen objects beneath heavy coats against the cold. Somewhere beyond the ruined walls, Beijing waits in exhausted silence. The empire still survives, but something sacred has been broken. After the armies leave, the silence feels unnatural. You walk through villages outside Beijing, where doors hang crooked from burned homes and winter wind moves softly through empty courtyards. The smoke has mostly faded now. Snow gathers along broken walls and abandoned carts half buried beside the road. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once and then stops. War always leaves behind a quieter second life. A life of repair, of grief, of counting what remains. The great treaties and military victories dominate official histories, but most people experience the Opium Wars differently. Not through diplomatic language or strategic maps, through missing relatives, through ruined businesses, through hunger arriving slowly after trade collapses and crops fail. The ordinary consequences spread farther than the battles themselves. In Canton, Shanghai, Tianjin, and countless smaller settlements, families adapt to a transformed world they never chose. Some profit from the new systems, many simply endure them. A widow in Guangdong sells pieces of embroidered cloth beside a market street because her husband died transporting military supplies during the war. A former soldier returns home missing 2 fingers and finds his farmland already claimed by debt. A dock worker in Shanghai discovers foreign steamships now unload cargo faster than entire teams of labourers once could. History changes economies quietly at first, then all at once. The opium trade grows even larger after the Second Opium War. Legal barriers weaken, foreign imports increase dramatically. Chinese merchants participate alongside foreign firms because the profits remain enormous and demand never fully disappears. The drug settles deeper into daily life across many regions. Not every household suffers equally. Historians still debate exact addiction rates and regional variations. Certain communities remain relatively untouched. Others become saturated by dependency and financial ruin. But the emotional presence of opium spreads everywhere. A son waits outside a smoking den while his father spends another evening disappearing into sweet-smelling haze. A magistrate secretly speaks before issuing moral proclamations condemning the practice publicly. Merchants discuss exchange rates and shipping schedules while nearby labourers sell family possessions to sustain habits they no longer control. The contradictions become exhausting. You enter a small opium house in Shanghai one rainy night. Warm smoke curls beneath dark wooden beams, while lamps cast dim yellow light across exhausted faces. Rain taps steadily against paper windows. The room smells faintly sweet, mixed with sweat, damp clothing, and old ash. A man reclines silently beside the wall holding an ivory pipe with trembling fingers. Perhaps he once studied for imperial examinations. Perhaps he carried cargo along the docks. Perhaps both. The wars did not create all suffering inside Qing China. That matters historically. Poverty, corruption, administrative weakness, and internal rebellion already existed long before foreign gunboats arrived. But the wars deepen wounds dramatically, and perhaps more importantly, they expose vulnerability. The Qing state still governs vast territory. After 1860, yet confidence in the dynasty weakened steadily. Military defeats against foreign powers damage imperial prestige. Internal rebellions continue ravaging huge sections of the country. Local elites increasingly doubt whether Beijing fully understands conditions beyond the capital. Trust erodes slowly before institutions collapse. Meanwhile, foreign influence expands through treaty ports and commercial networks with growing confidence. Banks, shipping companies, missionaries, trading firms, and consulates spread outward along the coast and rivers. Foreign architecture rises beside traditional neighborhoods. Western clothing appears more frequently among urban elites. Some Chinese intellectuals respond with cautious curiosity, others with deep resentment, most with a mixture difficult to untangle cleanly. You sit beside a tea stall in Tianjin during early evening while workers discuss recent changes over bowls of noodles steaming in the cold air. One man says foreign machines and weapons must be studied if China hopes to survive. Another replies bitterly that learning from invaders feels like swallowing humiliation itself. Neither sounds entirely wrong. Across China, conversations like this multiply. What should change? What must remain? How does a civilization modernize without surrendering itself completely? The questions have no easy answers. In Beijing, the Qing court struggles onward after the emperor's death in 1861. New political figures emerge around the young Tongzhai emperor, including the formidable Empress Dowager Cixi, who will shape Chinese politics for decades. The dynasty begins tentative reform efforts, later called the Self-Strengthening Movement. Officials establish arsenals, shipyards, translation schools, and diplomatic offices aimed at learning Western technology while preserving Confucian political foundations. Chinese learning for essence, Western learning for utility. One reform slogan declares, "It sounds elegant, reality proves harder, because technology never arrives alone. Guns require industry. Industry requires finance and infrastructure. Modern diplomacy requires different assumptions about sovereignty and international relations. Every reform opens new tensions inside the old imperial structure, and beneath all policy debates lies memory. The memory of foreign soldiers marching through Beijing, the memory of burning palaces, the memory of treaties signed under military threat. Those memories settle deeply into the national imagination. One winter evening, a former court servant stands near the ruined grounds of the old summer palace, while snow drifts across broken stone. The gardens remain scarred years later. Charred beams lie collapsed beneath frost. Sections of marble survive like exposed bones beneath pale sky. He remembers the palace before the fires, the silence there, the lakes, the painted corridors glowing softly in Hornig light. Now visitors walk through ruins instead. History sometimes destroys beauty faster than generations can create it. Far away in Britain, however, the Opium Wars gradually fade into broader imperial narratives about trade expansion and global influence. Newspapers celebrate commercial growth in Asia. Merchants focus on profits flowing through treaty ports. Most ordinary British citizens never fully confront the human cost carried inside these victories. Distance softens moral discomfort remarkably well. Yet even within Britain, certain critics continue questioning the wars long afterward. Religious reformers, politicians, and writers condemn the conflict's association with narcotics trafficking and coercive diplomacy. The arguments never disappear completely. They simply become quieter beneath the machinery of empire. Back in China, daily life continues because it must. Children still chase one another through crowded alleys. Farmers still plant rice beneath monsoon skies. Riverboats still crowd the waterways carrying tea, salt, timber, and grain through ancient trade networks older than any European empire. Human continuity survives even damaged worlds. But something fundamental has changed inside the relationship between China and the West. The old confidence is gone. In its place comes suspicion, adaptation, resentment, fascination, ambition, fear, and the growing realization that the 19th century will belong to industrial power whether China welcomes it or not. Outside the treaty ports, winter's rain begins falling softly across dark river water, and somewhere in the distance, another generation is already growing up beneath the long shadow of the Opium Wars. The fires of rebellion spread across China like a second weather system. You travel now through provinces already weakened by war, corruption, flooding, and hunger, where the land itself seems exhausted beneath endless movement of soldiers and refugees. Roads disappear into mud after heavy rain. Entire villages stand half abandoned beside fields gone wild with weeds. Smoke rises from distant hills where fighting still continues somewhere beyond sight. The Taiping Rebellion grows during the same decades as the Opium Wars, and together the two crises begin tearing at the Qing dynasty from opposite directions. Foreign pressure arrives from the sea. Internal collapse rises from within. For ordinary people, the distinction matters less than survival. You pass a long line of displaced families moving slowly along a riverbank beneath grey skies. A grandmother carries cooking pots tied with rope across her back. Children walk barefoot through cold mud, clutching scraps of cloth against the wind. A former farmer pushes a cart containing nearly everything his family still owns. No one speaks much anymore. Exhaustion has a soundlessness to it. The Taiping movement itself emerges from extraordinary origins. Its leader, Hong Xiuquan, is a failed examination candidate from southern China who experiences visions after encountering Christian missionary writings. Over time, he comes to believe himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ, chosen to destroy the Qing dynasty and establish a heavenly kingdom on earth. The beliefs sound startling even now. At the time, they sound equally strange and dangerously compelling, because the rebellion grows not merely from religion, but from widespread desperation. Population pressures, land shortages, corruption, local inequality, ethnic tensions, and dynastic weakness create conditions where radical visions can flourish. Millions eventually follow the Taiping cause, and millions more will die because of it. The Qing government struggles desperately to contain the rebellion while also managing foreign treaty pressures after the Opium Wars. Entire provinces become battlefields. Cities change hands repeatedly. Agricultural systems collapse in some regions. Disease spreads through refugee populations already weakened by hunger. The scale of suffering becomes almost impossible to measure cleanly. Historians still debate precise death tolls, but estimates often reach tens of millions. When numbers grow that large, the human mind struggles to hold them properly. So history survives instead through smaller moments. A mother hiding her child beneath floorboards while soldiers search nearby homes. A scholar burning family records before fleeing a captured city. A young rebel recruit staring silently at battlefield smoke while rain drips from his sleeves. The empire begins fracturing emotionally long before it fully breaks politically. Meanwhile, the treaty ports continue expanding almost strangely untouched compared to the interior devastation. Shanghai grows wealthy from commerce flowing through foreign-controlled districts protected partly by international military presence. Banks multiply, steamships crowd the riverfront. Foreign businessmen discuss profits over imported wine, while only a few hundred miles away entire counties descend into starvation and war. The contrast feels surreal. One British merchant in Shanghai remarks privately that China appears to contain several centuries at once. Glittering commercial modernity beside medieval-scale collapse. Foreign powers navigate the rebellion carefully. Britain and France initially remain uncertain whether supporting the Qing dynasty or the Taipings better serves their interests. Some missionaries briefly feel intrigued by Taiping Christian language, before recognizing how radically it diverges from orthodox doctrine. Eventually, most Western governments support the Qing state pragmatically. Stability and treaty protection matter more than revolutionary experimentation. This decision shapes the future profoundly. Foreign military advisors, weapons, and commercial support increasingly assist Qing regional armies against the rebels. Men like Zheng Guofan and Li Hongjiang emerge as powerful provincial leaders, organizing modernized forces capable of resisting the Taiping advance. The central Qing state weakens. Regional military power strengthens. Another long-term transformation begins quietly beneath the violence. You stand now beside the walls of a city recently reclaimed from Taiping control. Winter air smells of smoke, sewage, and decaying wood. Civilians move cautiously through streets littered with rubble, while Qing soldiers patrol beside damaged temples and collapsed market stalls. Victory does not look triumphant here, only tired. One soldier sits beside a burned doorway cleaning mud from his boots with slow mechanical movements. He has spent years marching through famine zones, siege battles, and disease outbreaks. He barely remembers what peaceful life once felt like. War reshapes memory itself. The Opium Wars continue haunting these decades even when not directly visible. Foreign treaty systems limit Qing sovereignty. Opium imports expand. Coastal cities operate increasingly under international commercial influence. Every major political decision now unfolds beneath awareness of foreign military superiority. Humiliation becomes part of governance. That emotional burden affects reform efforts deeply. Some Qing officials push for modernization precisely because the Opium Wars exposed terrifying military weakness. Shipyards are built, translation bureaus established, Western weapons purchased, students sent abroad cautiously. Others fear reform itself may accelerate cultural collapse already visible through foreign influence and internal rebellion. The arguments grow bitter. How much change can China survive? How much can it refuse? Inside Shanghai, young Chinese intellectuals gather in tea houses and private study groups discussing these questions late into the night. Oil lamps flicker beside imported newspapers and translated scientific texts. One student argues that industrial technology alone matters most. Another insists moral renewal must come first. A third quietly asks whether the dynasty itself can survive the century at all. Nobody answers immediately, because the question feels dangerous even spoken softly. Elsewhere, opium continues threading through every layer of society. Rebel soldiers smoke it, Qing officials smoke it, merchants, labourers, scholars, and refugees smoke it. Some use it occasionally. Others disappear into dependency completely. The drug has become woven into the fabric of the age. And always there remains the bitter knowledge of how foreign pressure helped deepen its spread after military defeat. One evening near the Yangtze, rain falls steadily over a crowded refugee camp outside a walled town. Families huddle beneath patched cloth shelters, while distant artillery echoes faintly through the darkness. A child asks her mother whether the war will end soon. The mother says yes automatically, but she no longer believes it herself, because by now China feels trapped inside overlapping disasters: foreign invasion, internal rebellion, economic strain, political fragmentation, cultural uncertainty, and beneath everything, the growing realization that the old imperial order may never fully recover what it has lost. The Taiping Rebellion will eventually be crushed with staggering violence. The Qing dynasty will survive for several more decades. But survival is not the same as healing. Along the rivers and roads of China, another generation grows up surrounded by ruins, foreign ships, reform debates, and memories of smoke rising over cities. They will inherit all of it. Empires often appear most confident when viewed from far away. From London, the British Empire in the late 19th century seems unstoppable. Steamships connect continents. Telegraph cables carry messages beneath oceans. Banks finance trade across vast distances. Maps inside government offices glow red with imperial territory stretching around the globe. But if you move closer, the machinery looks more human, more fragile. You stand inside a counting house near the Shanghai Bund while clerks scratch figures into thick ledgers beneath weak afternoon light. The room smells of ink, damp paper, tobacco smoke, and wet wool carried in from the rain outside. Cargo values are calculated carefully, insurance rates adjusted, exchange prices debated in several languages at once. Tea, silk, cotton, silver, opium, everything becomes numbers eventually inside empire. The merchants overseeing these networks rarely see themselves as villains. Many genuinely believe they are building modern commerce, expanding prosperity, and connecting civilizations through trade. Some are polite men who donate to churches, fund schools, and write affectionate letters home describing Chinese gardens and river landscapes. Yet their profits remain tied to unequal treaties enforced through military violence. That contradiction sits quietly beneath the polished surfaces of treaty port life. You walk through Shanghai during the 1870s while the city expands at astonishing speed. European-style banks rise beside crowded Chinese markets. Gas lamps illuminate streets that only recently turned dark after sunset. Newspapers circulate daily carrying stock prices, shipping schedules, political rumours, and serialized fiction. The future seems to arrive unevenly here. A rickshaw puller splashes barefoot through muddy alleys, while nearby foreign businessmen discuss global finance beside imported crystal glasses. Steam whistles echo across the river, while temple bells ring softly from older neighbourhoods, hidden behind warehouses and factories. Different centuries overlap within the same streets. Foreign commercial firms now influence enormous sections of Chinese economic life. British trading companies dominate shipping and banking networks tied to treaty port commerce. American firms expand operations steadily. French, German, and later Japanese interests compete for influence and concessions. Every power wants a piece of China, not always through outright colonization, often through finance, treaties, ports, railways, and strategic pressure instead. This softer form of imperial control can feel almost invisible at first, until you notice who sets the terms inside foreign clubs. Businessmen speak openly about China's potential, while servants move quietly between tables refilling glasses. Maps hang on the walls beside shipping charts and hunting paintings from India or Africa. Conversations drift from commodity prices to railway investments to rumours about unrest in the interior provinces. The atmosphere feels comfortable, too comfortable, because beyond the polished wood and imported carpets lies a country still struggling through the aftermath of rebellion, famine, and forced adaptation after the Opium Wars. The profits flowing through Shanghai rarely reach villages devastated by conflict. A banker in London invests in Chinese shipping routes without ever seeing the labourers hauling cargo along the Yangtze in freezing rain. An opium merchant calculates yearly earnings while never entering the smoking rooms where addiction hollows out exhausted lives. Distance protects conscience remarkably well. Yet the system also traps ordinary British workers in its machinery. Sailors spend years crossing dangerous seas for modest wages. Clerks arrive in China young and lonely, often dying from disease before middle age. Dock workers in Liverpool handle tea and goods tied to imperial trade while living in cramped industrial poverty themselves. Empire distributes suffering unevenly, but widely. You meet a Scottish shipping clerk one foggy evening beside the Shanghai waterfront. He leans against a railing staring toward the river while cold mist curls around anchored steamships. His hands shake slightly from too much alcohol and too little sleep. He tells you he once imagined the East as glamorous. Now he mostly feels tired. He misses rain that smells like home instead of coal smoke and river mud. He misses voices he understands instinctively. Yet he also knows returning to Britain may mean unemployment and smaller prospects than remaining here. So he stays. Many people inside imperial systems stay because alternatives feel narrower. Meanwhile, Chinese merchants adapt creatively to the changing world around them. Some build fortunes through partnerships with foreign firms. Others establish modern factories, shipping companies, and banking ventures using techniques learned through treaty port commerce. Chinese entrepreneurship flourishes despite unequal conditions. That complexity matters. The Opium Wars weaken China profoundly, but they do not reduce Chinese society to passive victimhood. Local elites, merchants, reformers, labourers, translators, and officials constantly negotiate, resist, exploit, and reshape the new realities surrounding them. History moves through adaptation as much as domination. Still, resentment deepens steadily beneath the surface. You hear it in conversations across the treaty ports and inland cities alike. Complaints about foreign arrogance, anger over missionary privileges, humiliation surrounding extraterritorial laws, fear that China is becoming economically dependent upon outsiders controlling key industries and trade routes. And always the memory of the wars remains nearby. The burned palaces, the unequal treaties, the opium smoke. A Chinese scholar in Tianjin writes bitterly that foreign powers preach civilization while enforcing addiction through cannon fire. A British businessman dismisses such complaints as emotional exaggeration obstructing progress. Neither fully sees the other's blindness. During these years, global capitalism tightens its grip across continents. Railways spread, telegraph systems shrink, communication time dramatically. Industrial manufacturing accelerates competition between empires hungry for markets and resources. China increasingly becomes an object of international strategic desire. Russian influence expands from the north. French power grows in Southeast Asia. Japan modernizes rapidly after the Meiji Restoration and begins eyeing regional dominance itself. The world surrounding China grows more dangerous every decade. Inside Qing leadership circles, reform efforts continue unevenly. Certain arsenals and shipyards achieve impressive technological advances. Diplomats study foreign systems carefully. Educational missions send students abroad. Yet conservative resistance, bureaucratic fragmentation, corruption, and financial weakness limit deeper transformation. The dynasty modernizes cautiously while history accelerates impatiently around it. One rainy night in Shanghai, a wealthy comprador sits alone after dinner beside a window overlooking the river. Compradors serve as intermediaries between foreign firms and Chinese commerce, often becoming extremely rich through their position between worlds. He watches steamships moving through the darkness beneath scattered lantern light. His children study English. His business depends upon foreign banks. His ancestors served imperial administrations loyal to Confucian ideals older than Europe's industrial age. Inside him, entire historical eras coexist uneasily. Outside, the rain keeps falling over the treaty port, and somewhere far inland, farmers struggling through another difficult harvest season barely recognize the transformed world being constructed along the coast in the aftermath of the Opium Wars. Yet eventually, its consequences will reach them too, because empires do not merely conquer territory, they reorganize time, memory, ambition, and the shape of daily life itself. By the end of the 19th century, humiliation has become political memory, not only for officials or scholars, for students, merchants, workers, families telling stories quietly over evening meals. You feel it in the atmosphere of Chinese cities now, especially among younger generations who inherit the consequences of the Opium Wars without remembering the world before them. The treaty ports remain crowded with foreign influence. Mission churches stand beside traditional temples. Railways begin cutting through landscapes once crossed only by horse, boat, or foot. Modernity arrives carrying foreign accents, and many Chinese intellectuals begin asking painful questions. Why did China lose, not only militarily, civilizationally? You sit inside a study room in Beijing where several reform-minded scholars gather beneath dim lantern light during the 1890s. Outside, winter wind rattles against wooden shutters while snow drifts softly through dark alleyways. Books lie open across the table, classical Confucian texts beside translated Western scientific works, military manuals beside political essays. The men speak quietly because criticism of the dynasty still carries danger. One argues China must modernize completely or face destruction. Another warns blind imitation of the West will dissolve Chinese moral foundations entirely. A third says the empire already lost the old world during the Opium Wars. The real question now is whether anything can still be saved. Silence follows, because everyone in the room understands the emotional weight behind those words. The Opium Wars become more than historical events during these decades. They evolve into symbols, starting points for a broader narrative of decline and foreign domination later called the Century of Humiliation. That phrase will matter enormously in the future, but first it grows slowly through accumulated memory. The unequal treaties continue expanding after the original wars. Foreign concessions multiply. Additional powers demand privileges. Railways, mines, ports, and commercial rights become bargaining chips inside international diplomacy shaped heavily against Chinese interests. Then new shocks arrive. China loses the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895 with devastating speed. That defeat wounds deeply because Japan once occupied a lower position within the traditional East Asian order shaped by Chinese civilization. Now Japan modernizes successfully and defeats Qing forces decisively using industrial military systems China struggled to build effectively. For many reformers, the lesson feels terrifyingly clear. Modernization is no longer optional, yet agreement about how to modernize remains elusive. The 100 Days Reform briefly attempts sweeping institutional change in 1898 under the Guangxu Emperor, educational reform, bureaucratic restructuring, military modernization, industrial development. The effort collapses quickly after conservative backlash led partly by Empress Dowager Cixi. Another opportunity slips away. You walk through Shanghai during these years while the city grows brighter, wealthier, and more divided. Electric lights begin appearing along the major streets. Foreign banks tower over crowded Chinese neighborhoods where laborers still haul cargo by hand through muddy alleys. The contrast feels sharper now. Foreign residents enjoy privileged legal protections and economic influence within treaty concessions. Chinese citizens move through the same streets under different systems entirely. Young students notice this constantly. A Chinese teenager educated partly in missionary schools reads Western political philosophy by candlelight while also hearing family stories about the burning of the Summer Palace. He admires aspects of modern science and constitutional government. He also burns with resentment. Those emotions coexist across an entire generation. Nationalism grows from that contradiction, not simple hatred of foreigners, though that exists too. Something more complicated. A desire for dignity restored, sovereignty reclaimed, weakness overcome. The memory of the Opium Wars feeds this emotional transformation steadily. Meanwhile, foreign powers continue treating China increasingly as territory available for influence and partition. Germany seizes Qingdao, Russia pushes southward, Britain expands holdings near Hong Kong and along strategic trade routes. France strengthens control in Indochina. Maps inside European ministries divide Chinese regions into spheres of influence. The language itself feels cold, as though civilization can be measured through railway rights and harbour access. Inside China, anger begins erupting more openly. Secret societies spread anti-foreign rhetoric through rural communities suffering from drought, unemployment, missionary tensions, and economic disruption. Local grievances blend with broader nationalist resentment until the atmosphere becomes combustible. Then comes the Boxer Uprising. At first, the movement appears chaotic and decentralized. Young men practice martial rituals, believing spiritual discipline can protect them from bullets. Foreign missionaries and Chinese converts face attacks. Railways and telegraph lines are destroyed. The Qing court hesitates uncertainly between suppression and support. Eventually, sections of the dynasty align partially with the Boxers against foreign powers. The result becomes catastrophic. An international alliance invades China in 1900, capturing Beijing after brutal fighting. Foreign troops loot, execute suspected rebels, and impose another crushing indemnity upon the Qing government. The cycle repeats again. Humiliation layered upon humiliation. You stand in Beijing after the Allied occupation while smoke still lingers faintly above damaged districts. Foreign soldiers patrol broad avenues once reserved for imperial processions. Civilians move carefully through the streets, avoiding eye contact when possible. An old man mutters that China has become a house with broken doors. No one argues with him. By now, the emotional legacy of the Opium Wars reaches far beyond the original conflicts themselves. They become the beginning of a historical pattern many Chinese intellectuals believe explains everything afterward. Military weakness, foreign domination, internal corruption, failed reform, national humiliation. This narrative shapes revolutionary movements emerging into the early 20th century. Reformers, nationalists, republicans, communists, and modernizers all interpret the Opium Wars through different ideological lenses, but almost everyone agrees the wars marked a turning point, a wound. One evening in 1905, a Chinese student studying abroad in Japan writes in his journal about returning home someday to help rebuild the nation. He describes seeing modern railways, factories, schools, and constitutional systems functioning successfully in Tokyo, while remembering stories from his grandfather about British gunboats entering Chinese rivers decades earlier. The past and future collide inside his imagination, and millions of others begin imagining similar futures. Not all will agree about what China should become, but increasingly, they agree about what it must never again endure. The Opium Wars now live not only in archives or ruined palaces, they live inside political identity itself. Along the Bund in Shanghai, foreign ships still crowd the river beneath electric lights glowing through fog and coal smoke. Business continues. Tea, silk, machinery, and opium still move through global networks connecting continents. Yet beneath the commercial rhythm, something quieter has changed. China is beginning to remember the wars not as isolated defeats, but as the beginning of a national awakening shaped by pain. The Opium Wars never fully end inside Chinese memory. You can still feel their presence more than a century later, though the world surrounding them has changed beyond anything the people of Canton or Beijing could have imagined. Bullet trains now cross landscapes once travelled by river barge and horseback. Neon lights shimmer above skylines where treaty port warehouses once stood beside muddy streets. Yet the old wounds remain visible beneath modern glass and steel. You walk through the ruins of the old summer palace on a cool autumn morning in present-day Beijing. The air smells faintly of wet leaves after overnight rain. Tourists move quietly among broken marble columns and weathered stone foundations while guides speak softly about fire, invasion, and loss. Children listen carefully. Many already know that the story from school, the burned palace, has become more than a historical site. It is a symbol, a physical reminder that national humiliation was once real enough to touch, burn, and steal. Nearby, a grandfather points toward the ruins while explaining to his granddaughter that foreign armies destroyed beauty here long ago. His voice carries sadness, but also warning. Never become weak again. That lesson echoes constantly through modern Chinese political culture. The Opium Wars occupy a central place in official historical narratives taught across China today. Museums, textbooks, films, speeches, and memorial sites present the conflicts as the beginning of the century of humiliation, when foreign powers exploited Chinese weakness through military force and unequal treaties. This interpretation shapes national identity profoundly, not because the wars alone explain modern China, but because they provide emotional structure to larger historical experiences of invasion, fragmentation, reform, revolution, and recovery. You enter a museum gallery in Guangzhou, where dim lighting falls across recovered artifacts from the 19th century. Rusted cannon fragments, treaty documents, opium pipes displayed behind glass, portraits of Commissioner Lin Zexu watching sternly from the walls. Visitors move slowly through the exhibits. Some pause the longest before paintings showing foreign warships entering in Chinese waters beneath black smoke and storm clouds. Others study maps illustrating lost territories and treaty ports forced open after military defeat. The atmosphere feels reflective rather than theatrical. History here is presented not as distant curiosity, but as living inheritance. Lin Zexu himself has become a deeply respected figure in modern China. Once criticized by certain Qing officials after the First Opium War, he is now widely remembered as a patriot who tried to defend the country against foreign narcotics trafficking and imperial pressure. Statues of him stand in public spaces. His writings are quoted in classrooms. His moral seriousness still resonates, and the opium itself remains emotionally powerful in collective memory. Modern narratives often portray the drug not merely as a harmful substance, but as a weapon used deliberately to weaken China socially and economically. Historians continue debating nuances around responsibility, addiction rates, Chinese participation in the trade, and broader global commercial systems. But emotionally, the symbolism remains potent. Opium represents exploitation, humiliation, vulnerability imposed from abroad. These themes appear constantly in political language surrounding national revival and sovereignty. You sit in a university lecture hall in Shanghai while students discuss 19th century history beneath bright fluorescent lights. Some challenge simplified narratives and ask difficult questions about Qing corruption, internal weakness, and global capitalism. Others emphasize foreign aggression and unequal power structures. The convertine feels more layered than official slogans alone, because modern Chinese society contains many perspectives. Yet even among disagreement, the emotional significance of the Opium Wars rarely disappears completely. People still recognize them as transformative. Outside the classroom, Shanghai itself embodies historical contradiction perhaps more vividly than any other Chinese city. The Bund remains lined with old colonial-era buildings, facing futuristic skyscrapers rising across the river in Pudong. Empire and modernization stare directly at one another here. Tourists photograph the skyline while river boats move through evening fog beneath glowing advertisements and financial towers. Somewhere below the modern streets lie foundations of the treaty port world built after the years. The past survive. It's just alive. Physically in fragment, and psychologically in many more. Meanwhile, relations between China and Western nations continue carrying echoes of 19th century memory, even when unspoken directly. Discussions about sovereignty, trade, military presence, technological dependence, and foreign criticism often trigger deeper historical sensitivities, shaped partly by the Opium Wars and their aftermath. Modern diplomacy rarely exists in the present alone. Nations remember emotionally. Sometimes for centuries, you hear this memory in speeches emphasizing rejuvenation, independence, and the refusal to accept foreign humiliation again. You see it in popular films portraying anti-imperial resistance. You feel it in public reactions whenever historical grievances involving foreign powers resurface. The 19th century still breathes quietly beneath modern politics, yet memory itself remains complicated. Not every Chinese citizen experiences the Opium Wars identically. Some focus on imperial aggression, others examine Qing failures more critically. Scholars debate historical interpretations constantly. Young people balancing globalized modern lives may feel differently from older generations shaped by revolutionary narratives. History never survives as one single emotion forever. Still, certain images endure powerfully. British gunboats on Chinese rivers, smoke rising above the Summer Palace, treaties signed under military threat. Those scenes remain lodged deep inside national consciousness. And outside China, the wars continue provoking reflection too. In Britain, historians increasingly examine the conflicts with sharper moral scrutiny than older imperial narratives once allowed. Museums reconsider colonial collections, scholars debate responsibility and historical memory. Public understanding grows more critical of the relationship between free trade ideology, narcotics commerce, and military coercion. The old certainties weaken. That matters because historical memory evolves across generations, shaped by new questions and changing moral landscapes. One evening in modern Hong Kong, rain falls softly against the harbour, while ferries move through neon reflections across dark water. The city itself remains deeply connected to the legacy of the Opium Wars through its colonial history and later returned to Chinese sovereignty in 1997. Here, perhaps more than anywhere else, layers of history overlap visibly. British legal system, Chinese cultural identity, global finance, imperial memory, modern political tension. The harbour has watched all of it. You stand along the waterfront listening to rain and distant ship horns, while skyscraper lights shimmer through low clouds. Somewhere beneath the noise of the modern city lies the older rhythm of sails, opium chests, treaty negotiations, and gunboats entering unfamiliar waters nearly 2 centuries ago. The people who lived through those years are long gone now, but the consequences remain astonishingly alive, because history does not disappear once treaties are signed or wars officially end. It settles into memory, into institutions, into identity itself. And sometimes, late at night beside the water, entire centuries still seem close enough to hear breathing. Night settles gently over the water. You stand once more beside the Pearl River, where this long story first began, though nothing is truly the same anymore. Modern lights shimmer across the surface in wavering colours, while distant traffic hums through the warm southern air. Cargo ships still move toward the sea, ferries still cross the harbour. Rain still drifts through the darkness during certain seasons, exactly as it did 2 centuries ago. History changes people faster than it changes rivers. The Opium Wars now feel both distant and strangely close at the same time. The men who argued in Canton warehouses, marched beside muddy roads, negotiated treaties under pressure, or watched palaces burn have vanished into the silence of history. Yet the world they helped create remains around you everywhere. Modern China emerged partly through the trauma of those conditions with industrial empire. Britain's global rise carried shadows alongside achievement. International trade reshaped civilizations while also exposing how easily commerce can become entangled with coercion, addiction, and power. No one leaves this history completely innocent. Not the merchants protecting profits, not the officials trapped inside rigid systems, not the empires convinced of their own righteousness, and not even the ordinary people who simply tried to survive while history moved around them like weather. That may be the most human part of the story. Most lives during the Opium Wars were not dramatic. They unfolded quietly beside enormous events. A clerk copying reports until his candle burned low. A mother waiting for news that never arrived. A sailor staring across dark water toward a country he did not understand. A translator carrying fragile meaning between hostile worlds. Empires speak loudly. Human suffering usually whispers. You walk slowly now through the memory of all these places. Canton beneath monsoon clouds and drifting lantern light. Shanghai rising from river mud into restless modernity. Beijing under winter snow while frightened officials argued through the night. The ruined gardens of the summer palace where smoke once carried centuries of beauty into the cold sky. Each place still exists in some form, each carries layers of memory invisible to passing strangers. And perhaps that is why the Opium Wars continue haunting the modern imagination so deeply, not simply because treaties were unequal or battles were lost, though those things matter, but because the wars forced entire civilizations to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. China confronted vulnerability after centuries of imperial confidence. Britain confronted the moral contradictions hidden inside commercial empire. The wider world confronted how industrial power could overwhelm older systems with terrifying speed. These realizations did not arrive all at once. They arrived gradually, painfully, through smoke, paperwork, ruined cities, and generations forced to adapt. Even now, historians still debate many details. How widespread opium addiction truly became in different regions, whether war might have been avoided through different diplomacy, which reforms could realistically have strengthened the Qing dynasty sooner. No final agreement survives history cleanly, but certain truths remain difficult to escape. Military superiority reshaped diplomacy. Profit often outweighed morality. Humiliation changed national consciousness for generations afterward, and ordinary people carried the heaviest burdens. The night air feels softer now along the river. You hear distant laughter from somewhere beyond the waterfront. A bicycle passes quietly along the pavement, far above. Apartment windows glow against the darkness where families prepare for sleep, watch television, finish late work, or simply sit together through another ordinary evening. Life continues. That too is part of history. Civilizations survive astonishing things. China endured rebellion, invasion, fragmentation, revolution, occupation, famine, civil war, and transformation after the Opium Wars. Britain's empire eventually faded into memory itself, leaving behind complicated legacies still debated today across former colonies and global institutions. Nothing remained fixed forever, not even the empires that once seemed eternal, and perhaps there is something strangely comforting in that realization tonight. Human power always feels permanent while it lasts. Then centuries pass, ships rot, treaties yellow with age, palaces become ruins visited by schoolchildren carrying cameras and bottled water. The people inside history rarely know what their world will eventually become. They only know the weather around them, the next conversation, the next journey, the next uncertain dawn. You think again of Commissioner Lin standing beside the destroyed opium at Humen, believing moral resolve could still preserve imperial order. Of British sailors coughing through coal smoke without understanding the political machinery carrying them across oceans. Of scholars, labourers, refugees, translators, merchants, and children watching unfamiliar futures arrive through river ports under foreign flags. None of them could fully see the centuries ahead. Neither can we, but maybe listening carefully to their lives helps us move through our own world with slightly more humility, slightly more awareness of how power behaves, slightly more caution about the stories nations tell themselves when profit, fear, and pride begin speaking too loudly together. The river keeps moving quietly beside you, and somewhere beyond the dark horizon, ships still travel east and west carrying goods, ambitions, technologies, and misunderstandings between distant worlds exactly as they always have. Only the names change. The human heart rarely does. So tonight, as this long journey through the Opium Wars finally grows still, perhaps what remains most clearly is not triumph or defeat, but the fragile humanity hidden beneath both. A tired clerk warming cold hands beside candlelight. A child asking whether the war will end soon. A ruined garden under falling ash. A river carrying memory toward the sea for staying through this long night of history. Thank you. Stories like these endure because people continue gathering quietly around them, searching not only for facts but for understanding. The Opium Wars were never just about treaties, trade, or military power. They were about fear, pride, ambition, survival, ambition. and the painful ways civilizations misunderstand one another when pressure rises. Perhaps some part of this journey reminded you of our own world too. The language changes, the technology changes, but nations still struggle with power, memory, identity, and the temptation to place profit above human cost. If this story stayed with you tonight, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you listened from, what moments lingered in your mind most strongly, or which parts of history you hope we travel through together next time. Maybe another empire waits beyond the horizon, another forgotten city beneath rain and candle smoke, another long-human story carrying both beauty and sorrow through the centuries. Until then, thank you for spending these quiet hours here beside the river of history.